welcome to the 5th Student and Emerging Conservator Conference in Cologne, Germany. We are all very excited to have you here, and I would like to start this conference with some introductory words from members of the Technical University in Cologne, from the Cologne Institute of Conservation Sciences, from the IIC and the VDR. So if I may, I welcome Professor Klaus Becker from the University of Cologne. He's the Vice President.
Right, thank you very much. Well, dear students, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm very pleased to welcome you here today on behalf of TH Köln to the 5th IIC-Student and Emerging Conservator Conference, which is held at our Cologne Institute of Conservation Sciences, shortly CICS. I don't know whether you pronounce it in English as well, CICS. Oh, so we are here at the CICS. And well, this conference is taking place the 5th time. The first conference has taken place in London in 2011, in Copenhagen in 2013, in Warsaw in 2015, and in Bern in 2017. And as these 4 cities are all capitals of their countries, we are really proud to welcome you here in Cologne today. We are not the capital of Germany. We are neither the capital of North Rhine-Westphalia, but we are the 4th largest city in Germany with approximately 1.1 million inhabitants at both sides of the River Rhine. And Cologne itself is located within the Rhine-Ruhr metropolitan area, which is Germany's largest and one of Europe's major metropolitan areas. At the moment, we are in the south of Cologne. I suppose that you have seen the River Rhine already. It's 300 meters over there in this direction. And on the other side of the river, in Cologne-Deutz, it is approximately 1.5 kilometers from here, there's another large location of our university. There are the engineering faculties over there. And further faculties are located in Gummersbach, which is 70 kilometers in the east of Cologne, and in Leverkusen, which some of you may know as a city from the football team over there, which is a bit north here from Cologne. Since some of you, or perhaps most of you, may not yet be familiar with our university, I just would like to give you a short overview of our organization, our structures, and our objectives. Our university has been founded in 1971 as Cologne University of Applied Sciences. And 4 years ago, we have rebranded the university to TH Köln, University of Applied Sciences. And within this multi-annual development period, we have systematically pushed forward innovation processes in research, teaching, and also in our degree programs. Nowadays, we're having approximately 26,000 students, so we are the largest university, by far the largest university of applied sciences in Germany, out of which approximately 10,000 students are located in this area here, where our humanity faculties are. Then another 10,000 students at the other side of the Rhine, what I already mentioned, and 5,000 in Gummersbach, and the rest then in Leverkusen. We employ approximately 1,800 people, out of which are 430 professors and 600 research associates in total 11 faculties. The subject from science which we are covering is quite wide, starting from the field from A to, well, going to the alphabet, from applied natural sciences, architecture and construction, information and communication, computer science, engineering, culture, society and social sciences, as well as business studies. So quite wide spectrum. And over time and nowadays, we managed quite well the cooperation between the different scientific disciplines, which is quite helpful in order to address the problems which we nowadays face as a society. For the students, we are offering nowadays nearly 100 degree programs as either bachelor or master courses, and they are either career integrated, some of them, or part-time programs. We maintain partnerships with more than 350 international universities and institutions from 120 countries, and we are convinced that high-quality research derives benefit from the exchange, the professional exchange across institutional and geographic boundaries, and therefore I'm quite happy to welcome such an international auditorium here. I'm just doing a check now. From Australia, there should be at least one student, 3, 4 students. You're welcome. Then from America, how many students? 2. The continent. The continent. So that's this continent. Then we haven't found yet somebody from Africa. So that's for the 6th edition of the conference, maybe an objective. And Asia, there are 2 marks. So we are really happy to, you're very welcome. And I think this is an excellent opportunity for you as students to open your mind, to get known to people from other countries, to get known to people from other cultures, and I think this is what drives our societies jointly for a peaceful together forward. The CICS, so the Cologne Institute of Conservation Sciences, is part of our Faculty of Cultural Sciences and offers various specifications. Do they already know the specification? And I didn't have the plan to repeat them anyhow. And here at the CICS, a number of high-quality project activities are conducted, and the CICS is focusing on scientific research and the conservation of art and cultural heritage. I'm sure that at the end of the 3 days you spending here in Cologne, you know all these different opportunities you are finding here. And the activities of the CICS that you are getting known to show, in principle, like, as an example, the core values of our university, which is making scientific findings effective to society and designing and shaping social innovation. This conference, which you are conducting now, today and tomorrow, contributes and pays tribute to these very values and delivers you an excellent opportunity, as I already mentioned, for exchange and networking. And it's our goal to enable our graduates in the best possible way for responsible activities in this changing and increasingly digitalized and international professional world. So I'm sure that the next hours will be quite interesting for yourselves in all dimensions, and I hope that you really enjoy your stay here in Cologne. And finally, I would like to thank the organizers and also the ICC for having made the decision to conduct the conference here in Cologne. And I also would like to thank the teams from Esther Ferreira and Gunnar Heidenreich, I think, who have spent an awful lot of hours to make this venue happen. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm really hope that you have a good time here in Cologne. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your words. And now, please welcome our Professor Heritage from the Cologne Institute of Conservation Sciences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, and once again, welcome to the 5th IIC-Student and Emerging Conservator Conference here in Cologne. My name is Adrian Heritage, and as one of the 3 directors of the Institute, and on behalf of my colleagues and our students, past and present, it's my honor to welcome you to with this opening speech. We shouldn't forget that whilst this event is being hosted in Cologne, in Western Germany, this is not merely a European event, but rather a global one. All of those who've physically journeyed, who has come across the continents once again? Okay, so all of those who physically journeyed here from other continents, as well as those watching on live stream. So welcome to you all. Cologne, as you've seen and you know, is situated on the Rhine River, and it's perhaps most famous for its Gothic cathedral, the Dome. For Germans, it's their favorite landmark, and it's also the most visited site in Germany. Cologne is also famous for its 12 Romanesque churches. for its Roman heritage, for its many museums, and also for its vibrant contemporary cultural landscape. It's also famous for CICS, as you've heard. We were founded in 1986, and as you've heard, we're part of the Cologne University of Applied Sciences, or TH Köln, as it's known now. And we were one of the first academic training schools set up in Germany. Indeed, we're the largest conservation training school in Germany, and we offer a wide range of specializations. And Herr Becker didn't read out the specializations, but I will for you. I think it's important because some courses don't specialize, and we do specialize. Easel and panel painting, polychrome sculpture, modern and contemporary art, wall paintings and architectural polychromy, and stone objects, paper, prints, photography, and illuminated manuscripts, textiles, archaeological fibers, wooden objects, and modern materials. And I'm sure I've missed a few, but you get the idea that we specialize widely, and that's an important characteristic of our school. In 2010, we changed from a 4-year diploma to a 3-year BA and a 2-year master's. As such, we're a full member of ENCORE. ENCORE is the European Network for Conservation Restoration Education. This means we offer a 5-year academic training with integrated conservation practice as recommended by ECHO. ECHO is the European Confederation of Conservator and Restorers Organization. Importantly, our BA and MA programs cover preventive conservation approaches as well as theory and practice in structural conservation and restoration methodologies. The teaching includes physical sciences, these are largely material sciences, professional skills, such as documentation, art classes, and for the contextual cultural understanding of such important aspects such as significance and meaning of material and immaterial, of the immaterial and material, there is art history and art criticism, conservation history, and conservation ethics, which I like to call philosophy of conservation. I'd like to welcome the attending IIC board, the members, the council members, which include President Julian Burke, who will speak after me, and Sarah Staniforth. Is Sarah in the room? Sorry? Oh, okay. Hi, Sarah. Yeah. You know, we're delighted to have you here in the next days. And with Sarah, it was a pleasure yesterday to catch up with you, and we were able to have a stimulating professional discussion and also to chit the chat a little bit about our previous roles in English Heritage and the National Trust. Greetings also to Graham. Graham, hi, Graham. Thank you for all of your organization. Thank you. And I'd also like to welcome colleagues from the museums and their support during these few days from the other conservators and organizations in Cologne. Are there any of those here? Museums from Cologne? No, but thank you for those. Special thanks are due, looking in that direction, special thanks are due to the students of the local organizing committee, to the head organizers, Mariana Escamilla and Charlotte Hoffman. Could you make yourselves known? Yes, we know. Is Charlotte here? Yeah, okay, there's Charlotte, thank you. And please apologize if I miss somebody out, but Leonie Korte, Josephine Joly, Juliana Luckel, Marlin Mürker, Hannah Pesch, and Nadine Schönhütter. Thank you very much for all your help. And without you and all your efforts, it wouldn't have been possible. Can you just identify yourselves as well, please? Are you there? Yes, okay. Thank you very much. This conference is entitled The Conservators' Reflection. Indeed, self-reflection and professional reflection, together with critical and creative thinking, These are essential activities for the now. Where's Jane? Oh, hi, Jane. Hello. For the now and for the future. You, the students and emerging conservators, will both shape and be shaped by future societies. It's undeniable that along with the grave issue of climate change, of conserving our very planet, let alone the cultural things we value within it, you will be confronted, helped and hindered by the fourth industrial revolution. As our reliance on electronic devices increases in this Internet of Things and with AI, how will this affect the working life of a conservator? Will the future virtual conservator assistant, probably looks something like that now, become a machine, a robot enhancement, augmenting our abilities, and or perhaps even replacing the traditional human conservator? Certainly our ever-increasing reliance on ever-increasing data sets and on the algorithms which convert this data to information and to the vast body of knowledge we receive ready at hand, a Heidegger reference there, such powerful tools will offer both opportunities and dangers. Can we function independently of these technologies? And will reliance on machines enhance or rather dictate conservation decision-making and conservation in practice? Critical reflective thinking and problem-solving capabilities, as well as ethical considerations, will be essential along with ensuring any necessary manual dexterity, which is threatened, and the further development of haptic skills. Only then will we be ready and equipped to deal with the here and now, as Jane Henderson so aptly stressed this morning. Seriously, as societies their values change over time, what will the new nows look like? The values societies place on aesthetics, on collecting and preserving, on used things, historic things, old things. Indeed, these values will change, and such changes will affect your working lives and the future of conservation. The fourth industrial revolution will radically change the museum as we know it, blending the boundaries between the physical and the digital, the real and the virtual world, within and without the museum, potentially without the museum. How will these changes affect the working life of the conservator and the relevance of conservation and conservators in their societies? Ultimately, it will come down to the values which future society places on the authenticity of objects, the aura of the original, as Walter Benjamin put it, the value of the real object as opposed to the virtual one. The future doesn't have to be dystopian, like Huxley's Brave New World. And as Sarah isn't here, I can put in a plug for Jonathan Porritt's book, The World We Made, A Positive View of the Future. Indeed, the future can be utopian. As I've said, you will help to shape, and you will be shaped by these developments. What you have individually and share together as conservators is a focus on something which is important: the appreciation and care of cultural heritage, which is undeniably an essential element of well-being. You share an interest in improving our world through your contributions as professional conservators. You can and should get job satisfaction. That's a major aspect of conservation work, I think. But there is much work to do to get our profession recognized, for fair remuneration, and for good work practices in an increasingly unregulated gig economy. So from our perspective at CICS, in this School of Conservation, along with the importance of improving practical training at an academic level, our students need to learn to think deeply and to communicate effectively with society. This leads us back to the now and this event, and the Conservators' reflection, and hence I'm going to pass over to Julian. May I do that, or? Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Adrian. What a great start to this exciting 2 days. I'm Julian Burke. I'm the president of IIC. I'm actually based in Australia, and I want to acknowledge my Australian colleagues up here for coming all the way to be part of this great event. I think it reflects how important it is looking from outside in to what these events do achieve. I want to acknowledge Herr Becker's warm welcome to us, and in particular I want to acknowledge Anne Harmson representing VDR, who's going to speak after me, and Adrian as well. Thank you for all that you've brought to setting the scene. Mariana and Charlotte, Mariana's gone over here, have been so helpful to us in terms of the IIC Council. We've met here for the last 2 days, which Gunnar has been key in organising us. Thank you for looking after us so well. It's meant that we've had a couple of days to settle into your great city for those of you that are based here and go around CICS and see what a wonderful facility you have. These student emerging conservators are really important to us, and being part of this morning, both the tours and the initial welcome, the energy is palpable. And hearing Adrian talk, I was thinking, gosh, I wish I was 20 really in terms of getting into this great profession. I do think it's as exciting as it was when I joined the profession 40 years ago. I think the digital overlay is one that brings a whole range of new opportunities and challenges. But it is why it gives us such a buzz as seasoned professionals. None of us, I don't think, too old and hackneyed not to understand what it is to be part of all of this. What I did want to do is talk a little about IIC. As you've heard, this is the 5th of these conferences we've organised. These conferences are part of a broader picture of what we do as the leading independent professional organisation for conservators worldwide. We have 3 sort of tenets. One is our independence. We are funded by our own membership and other funds that we raise. We have no government income. And that gives us, of course, the ability to speak without fear or favour, and on occasions I hope we do that effectively. Secondly, we set a very high benchmark for exemplary practice. Studies in Conservation, I think you'd all agree, is the technical publication in our world. We have a wonderful publication called News in Conservation, which goes more broadly than to anybody that wants to sign on to it. It's an online publication, but really fills a gap that no other publication does in terms of what's happening around, around the world in conservation. We then, of course, have this tradition of congresses. We have our core biennial congress, and the next one is in Edinburgh in November next year, where we're looking at the whole issue of practices and challenges in built heritage conservation, a space we've not gone into before, and it's an interesting one. It's looking at, in a sense, the overlap where we as materials conservators start coming up against the built heritage component of what we do. Before that, we've got a key 2-day dialogue and symposium that's being organised by my colleague Avakar in the Smithsonian, where we're looking at the major issue of climate change, supported by the Smithsonian, who are very keen to see us as part of all of that. That's an important part of the next few months. And then also we now are up to the 6th of our ITCC, our International Training Centre for Conservation, which is a collaboration we have with the Palace Museum in Beijing, and we're running our next one in November on ceramics and glass conservation. And these are extraordinary operations. I hope some of you might have been on them. They operations in a sense that 24 students from around the world, half of them from China and half from externally, come together in Beijing, entirely funded by the Chinese government, for an intense and extraordinarily worthwhile few days of training. So there's lots happening, but the third key part of what we do is fellowship. We are We're a participatory organisation. We're very keen on that. We're a group of people, of which you are part, as part of this conference, who really feel very strongly about what we do and want to participate in what we can achieve through it. We do that through sharing knowledge, through our publications, through our congresses. We do it through mentorship programs and through participating in events more broadly. So do join us. As Jane so aptly put this morning, it's very easy to join us, and we need you with all your energy to join the organisation. It's very easy to do so. Our Executive Secretary, Graham Vose, is over here, but there are lots of ways of which we're supporting you. We have both student and emerging conservator rates, and we'd love to have you participating on the journey as you enter into the early parts of your careers. I want to leave you with something which overlaps very nicely with what Adrian picked up on, which is authenticity. Lots of busy, buzzy words around at the moment, sustainability and things like that, but authenticity is one that I'm very taken with at the moment and would ask you to consider in the next 2 days. In this world of fake news and rampant distrust of traditional sources of information, according to a recent US survey, galleries and museums, where many of us will spend our lives, are amongst the most trustworthy of sources, higher than local government, local newspapers, academics, I'm sorry to say this, guys, and even, no surprises here, the government. So you are entering into a space where that is so important to hold on to. Of course, the key element which you're going to be involved in museums and galleries is the physicality of the objects. Again, as Adrian said, there's going to be the virtual as well, but the physical is what we see more and so much of in our museums and galleries. There's a whole other strand around authenticity and ethics in terms of those objects themselves, but UKIC, which is what ICON used to be called in its early days in 1983, had a nice phrase, which is, conservation is the means by which the true nature of an object is preserved. We've studied that and ditched it, let me say, but it's still, there's a resonance in there around the fact that we are about conserving the authentic. So as you enter these next 2 days of workshops, I'll leave you the thought to reinforce the importance of your work and to further inspire you as your careers develop, that this is such a richly rewarding profession, and it is being authentic in there which is really what makes us stand apart. So you're so fortunate, we're so fortunate to be part of it. I've had a wonderful career. You are about to have or have already entered on wonderful careers, and I do wish you well in these next 2 days as you explore that. Thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce Anne Harmson, who is on the board of VDR. Anne.
Thanks. Hello, dear colleagues. On behalf of the VDR, the VDR in German, VDR Executive Committee and the Executive Board, I would like to welcome you to this symposium, to which I have been invited to address you with a few words of welcome as a representative of the Association of Conservators. For the past 2 years, I have been responsible for the topic of continuing education and events at the VDR or VDR Executive Committee. At this international conference on the Conservators' reflection, you will explore the profession of conservator as such. What is their self-image? How are they viewed within the institution in which they work? And how does the public judge the profession that each of us present? Questions like this will certainly be answered in many different ways at this conference. The answers will give an insight into how our profession has developed, with its diverse characteristics that reflect the cultures and traditions of the countries from which we all come here together today. To begin, I would like to tell you about my professional experience and development, which differs greatly from yours today. And of course it does, since it has been 38 years since I chose the profession of conservator. In these years, our profession has evolved in terms of education, but also concerning in its position in society. During these past 38 years, I worked at various institutions in Germany and abroad, worked for some time with a freelance conservator, and have now, for many years, been the head of a large conservation studio at the Museumslandschaft Hessen Kassel in Kassel. If you haven't heard about it before, then you should visit us in Kassel. It's a beautiful institution with a wonderful collection. I have been able to observe the broader cultural perception of our profession from all kinds of perspectives over all these years, from museums, colleagues, the public, politicians, the media, even my own family. This change of perspective has for me always been and still is very helpful in reflecting on one's own position. Back then, when I had decided I wanted to be a conservator, my parents were not overjoyed. They thought it was something equivalent to being a starving artist, and they had no idea about the actual work. They were also worried about my financial future. The worry was not unjustified, as I do know today many freelance conservators who are in the verge of bankruptcy every year. I made my way to working at a museum and have been a civil servant since 1986. After 6 years of practical training in various institutions and also with freelance conservators, I found a permanent job at the Herzog Anton Ulrich Museum in Braunschweig. My many years of practical experience, my knowledge of materials and production methods of the most different kinds of works of art from various centuries, and my fine motor skills had been sufficient as a prerequisite for that position. At the museum where I worked, there was fantastic equipment that allowed us to perform infrared reflectography and X-radiography, which could be used for the technical investigations. When, at a studio tour, I was able to show my parents how I did an infrared reflectograph and what insights we could achieve with this method, they were deeply impressed. Of course, I had always reported on my activities already the years before, but it was only until my parents could see with their own eyes in the studio that they understood how varied the profession of the conservator is and what a wide range of knowledge and scientific competencies this work requires beside the practical skills. This is exactly what I observe today in tours of our studios. It is extremely important for our profession to present itself and our activities to the public, again and again at the complex and highly learned and sophisticated level at which we operate, like surgeons. In that, I then had the opportunity to do further education at the Canadian Conservation Institute in Ottawa. There, I learned about methods in the field of painting restoration, which had been partly unknown to me with my European experience, but which were convincingly applied at the CCI and also used by the Conservators in the neighboring USA. This stay abroad showed me how different the approach, the methods and materials in restoration or conservation can be if you just change the country, even if the ethical principles are the same. The study visit brought me many new contacts that inspired me to organize various varnish workshops with colleagues from Canada and here in Germany, as well as in an international conference on varnish. At that time, it was important for me to bring together the different positions and perspectives in order to find out the causes for different approaches to an object. Since the beginning of my career, I have been a member of the professional association. This association membership has not only brought me contacts with other colleagues, I was also allowed to be creative and found fellow campaigners in the associations for these ideas, because the organization of the association's work is largely in the members' hands. I always received expert support in developing conference topics and organizing events. I consider networking internationally, be it at the university, like today here in Cologne, but also within the association, to be immensely important, and would like to advertise it at this point. In addition to cooperating on a technical level, the Association of Conservators, the VDR, naturally also deals with the professional interests of currently around 3,000 conservators of all disciplines in Germany. As a professional association, we try to paint a clear picture of the multifaceted profession and to educate both public and politicians about the need for responsible cultural protection. We are committed to having the achievements of conservators with scientific training recognized both nationally and internationally through our membership of ECHO, the European Umbrella Organization of Conservation Associations. We are represented in large organizations such as the Federal Association of the Liberal Professions, the BFB here in Germany, which supports our concerns of professional title protection, which is very important for us, and to which we, as members of the liberal professions, actually belong. We are a member of the German Cultural Council, through which we participate in several expert committees and, for example, contribute to position papers issued by the Council. We also have a membership on the German National Committee for Monument Protection and are represented by a position on its board. And we also work closely together with partner organizations like the Deutscher Museumsbund, because it seems important to us that the conservation profession is acknowledged as an indispensable profession in the museum and in turn has an influenced decision-making that affects German museums. The Association of Conservators is fighting for better pay for salaried conservators who were for far too long firmly cemented on 50-year-old salary compensation models and partially still are. Also, we are working to improve the economic imbalance of freelance conservators. We inform freelance conservators, for example, how to calculate prices and how to defend them with their clients. And we would like to increase, of course, the reputation of the profession conservator, with actions such as the European Day of Conservation, which was launched last year and in which nearly 300 conservators participated by contributing 270 events last year. This brought us the attention of around 24,000 visitors here in Germany and 80 press reports, which is quite remarkable for the first day of action. As I mentioned before, we conservators should open our doors again and again in order to show what conservation means and what a responsible activity it is. My experience shows me that this is the best way to increase the reputation of the profession today in society. Do get involved, it's in your own interest, and show what you can do. To conclude, now I wish you all an exciting conference and inspiring discussions and exchanges with your colleagues while reflecting on our wonderful profession. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for these introductory words. Now it's my turn, and I would like to thank you all for being here. Without you, this wouldn't have been possible. We are, as I said before, very excited to have you here. I can say on behalf of the local organizing committee that you will have fruitful discussions and that the contacts you make right now with students and also with other professionals will be valuable in your professional life, I can promise you. I would also like to mention that we have 3 universities watching us right now live. One in Mexico, the Universidad Autónoma de San Luis Potosí, in Colombia, the Universidad Externado, and in Italy, the Studio Arts College International. Each of them have 10 to 20 students watching us right now. So hello, and thank you for watching. And well, right now, I would like to ask for a round of applause for the local organizing committee. First of all, I would like to thank Charlotte Hoffman for sharing with me the management of this organization. Thank you very much, Charlotte. For the fundraising and finances, I would like to ask Charlotte Stammann to stand up and also receive an applause. For catering and venue organization, I would I'd like to ask for a very, very large applause for Leonie Korte and Hannah Pesch. For speaker organization, principals and tour organizations, please, I would like to thank Nadine Schönhütte and Malin Mörk. For the IT, audio, and the streaming, please, a round of applause for Moritz Geismann and Raphael Kapau. And last but not least, our two professors in charge of this project, Professor Heidenreich and Professor Ferreira. Thank you very much. And with this, I think we can start our first session. So I would ask the speakers and the moderator, Professor Heidenreich, to come forward. Thank you.
So may I ask the participants of the first session to come in front and take a seat, please. Yeah, good afternoon once more, and I also would like to welcome you all here at CICS, and I welcome all of our guests which are here with me in the front and in the auditorium, and all the participants which watch our live streaming worldwide. We are here in Cologne in Germany, and I was told that outside of Germany it's sad that Germans try to be always in time and most efficient, and they have no sense of humor. And I can tell you I will try to fulfill all your preconceptions today. So it's a great privilege to have you all here. Welcome, and to this first session in this afternoon. And this first session aims to explore what common grounds or discrepancies we find in the individual perceptions of our own profession, and what is the individual motivation to become a conservator, and how is it shaped by professional goals and experiences. What are the core competences and the most important soft skills required by a conservator? What does the changing market demand, and how can these demands match our professional goals? Do we consider ourselves as specialists or rather as all-rounders? These are only a few of the questions that we would like to discuss with our guests and all of you this afternoon. And by looking at different career paths, we hope to inspire and encourage emerging conservators to reach professional goals and to get engaged with the development of our profession. So it's my great privilege and pleasure to introduce you to our guests today. Emma Hermans is the Rijksmuseum Professor in Studio Practice and Technical Art History at the University of Amsterdam and Senior Researcher in Technical Art History at the Rijksmuseum, where she works with interdisciplinary teams combining art historical and contextual research of objects with scientific analytical data. Although specializing in painting techniques from the Renaissance up to the modern times, she works across disciplines with a focus on workshops, the choreography of making artist materials and techniques, tacit and embodied knowledge, science and experimentation, artisanal knowledge and exchange and collaboration. Emma works in a number of research projects, and I'm sure we will hear a bit more about these in the following minutes. Gwendolyn Bouvet-Jones is the founder and director of Studio Redivivus and DVD Foundation, in The Hague in the Netherlands. And conservation and restoration of paintings are the central activities of this company. Its client base consists of various museums as well as several larger corporate and private collections. Technical investigations have focused on metal soaps and other degradation phenomena in works by Salvador Dali and Francis Picabia and Karel Appel. And Gwendolyn also researched the techniques and materials of Max Beckmann and Kees van Dangen, to name only a few of the many that she has researched. Julian Burke, welcome again. He, as you all know, is president of IIC, and he worked as a teacher and almost as a banker before training and working as furniture conservator in the UK. He moved then to Australia in 1984 to work for a powerhouse museum in Sydney before establishing an international conservation services company with more than 40 people staff. And Julian has always been actively involved in the conservation profession, both in Australia and internationally, valuing the great benefits that have come with such. And he also involved broadly in the museum profession, being on the board of 2 house museums, president of a fine and decorative arts society, a former president of ICOMOS Polar Heritage Committee, and owning a museum technology company. And I look forward to hearing more about how you managed to cope with all these different duties in parallel. Last but not least, I would like to welcome Thomas Gdanitz. He's an MA student at the University of Applied Science in Potsdam. And after finishing a voluntary year in cultural heritage preservation, Thomas spent 3 years learning the profession of a stone masonry at a company specialized in monument preservation. And in 2013, he began his studies in stone conservation in Potsdam, graduating with a BA in 2017. And the focus of his thesis was on the conservation of historic rammed concrete, and you will hear all about it, what that means, I guess, in a few minutes. And he is currently finishing his master thesis, which aims to creating a concept of treatment for 2 historist Prussian ediculae. And he also works as a freelance stone conservator in Germany, and his plan is to set up a company together with a colleague next year. So, we plan to start this session with short statements by all of our guests, and I would then like to open the discussion thereafter with all of you. And so I would like to ask Emma to come in front and to start and to give her statement. Emma, thank you.
Thank you, Gunnar, for your introduction. I'm a little bit the odd one out here, I think, because I'm probably the only person in this room who's no longer practicing as a conservator. But that's how sometimes career paths go. And so I will try to explain briefly, very briefly, because I'm not here to tell you my whole biography, how that came along. And then I will talk a little bit about where I work now and how conservation is a crucial element for what I do. So I started quite some time ago, training as a painting conservator after I did a master's in art history and Italian. And then I worked in various museums, Frans Hals Museum and the Mauritshuis and the Dutch Cultural Heritage Agency, as well as doing a PhD. So I worked part-time and I did a PhD along that in art history. I also had for 3 years a private practice, and I worked with several other conservators in a cooperative where we tackled very big projects, so in painting, so like a whole set, an assemblage in a orangerie in a big house and things like that, and we worked together. That was actually a very exciting part of my private practice, really, really interesting. I can recommend doing something like that very much. Then I started teaching at universities and on technical art history, so painting techniques, and also participated in various research projects. And then life took another direction, and I moved to the United Kingdom, which I left now. So Brexit is a very interesting situation because I'm sort of still living there and living in the Netherlands. They probably kick me out now from the UK. But there I started working at the University of Glasgow, and that was very much a research teaching post. First a research fellowship, then teaching in the art history program. So it was based in the Art History Institute there. However, then we managed to get the textile conservation program, which was stopping in Southampton University, to Glasgow University, and we established a center for textile conservation and technical art history. So it was already clear that that was a collaboration between various disciplines. And I set up the program, a master's program for technical art history, as a 1-year master's, which is now running for the 9th year. And of course, with my colleagues there who took over when I left. And it was a really challenging time to create that center and pull it all together and the different strands of research. But it shows that conservation is changing in that sense, that there is more and more an interdisciplinarity and an interdisciplinary collaboration. And I think from all that, technical art history sort of emerged, because within art history, there's more and more interest in the object as a physical entity, they call it sometimes the material turn, although materiality can also be very conceptual, but I'll stick to the actual material. And when I moved to Amsterdam and started my job at the Rijksmuseum and the University of Amsterdam, I ended up, of course, in the studio building of the Rijksmuseum, where under one roof you have all the studios, conservation studios from the Rijksmuseum in various disciplines, plus all the training studios from the conservation program of the University of Amsterdam, and the scientific labs from the Dutch Cultural Heritage Agency. So we're all in one building, and the whole idea to do that is that there should be collaboration between all these institutions and the staff, researchers, teachers, and so on. So for the students, that is a wonderful environment because you have access also to lots of museums that are literally across the road, and there's a lot of collaboration there. In the last years, the NICAS Institute, a virtual collaboration institute, was established, so the Netherlands Institute for Conservation, Art and Science, which contains several universities plus several museums in the Netherlands, and there's money from NWO, which is the Dutch a government body that funds research for research projects. And the funding goes to all kinds of things, including very much conservation methodology, but also technical art history and various different kinds of research. So what do I do further there? I teach at the Masters of Technical Art History, which is a 2-year program in the Netherlands. And there what we teach mostly art history students is to communicate and to understand scientific analysis, scientific research, but also to understand conservation. And there is by no means meant that they do anything practical in that sense, but that they, if they are curators, that they are better in communicating between all these disciplines and understanding that. It also is, of course, part of this whole idea that objects are physical entities, as I said, and that you, by combining all these different disciplines, you can understand our cultural heritage much better than purely as a theoretical approach. That's for the program we do. Many things are happening in this field, and one other thing that we did was NACA, that is with Gunnar and a whole team of people. It's a European project, New Advances in Conservation of Contemporary Art, with 15 PhD students, where we also had the same kind of connection between the theoretical and the practical, but also law, copyright, and all these elements that are coming in with contemporary art conservation, so also very interesting. And yeah, so from being a conservator, painting conservator, I went into research and basically left the practical part. But I do think I really feel that I could not have done what I'm doing now without having been many years working as a conservator. It really provides a lot of insights that I need for what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to teach art history students about materials, techniques, but also the contextualization of these practices. And it's all about communication and collaboration, and indeed, like what I said, the data science comes in big time now with lots of imaging techniques, the algorithms, etc. All very, very fascinating and important, but it still needs an interpretation. When you have the data science, that's the start of the research, I always say, because then we have to work with that, and that's the same for conservators as well as for technical art historians and art historians, I would say. Another important development is, of course, the whole public engagement element that's getting stronger and stronger about the profession and what we want to communicate. At the Rijksmuseum, you might have noticed we have now Operation Nightwatch, which is the conservation program going towards the restoration of the Nightwatch. But first of all, it's pure research with micro-XRF scanning, etc., in the glass house, as it's called, where conservators, scientists, and people like me are looking at the painting and examining it before decision-making on the conservation treatment. So it's not clear at all yet what is going to happen. That depends on that research. Doing such a research in front of the public is challenging for everybody, not only for the conservators, but also for the education department of the museum and the PR department. So there is a new collaboration between all these parties to create a very good public engagement exercise. All these things are sort of adding to what a conservator does and what a conservator needs to know and how to communicate. So I want to close with, because we have to be short, I want to close with an interesting thing I was part of a couple of weeks ago. There was a panel, discussion panel with Professor Roger Kneebone. He's a professor in surgery and science communication. Then the head of the Crime Forensics Institute at UCL in London. Then a taxidermist and me, as a discussion panel about what do we have in common. and you would say, well, what do you have in common? And it was actually a fantastically inspiring and interesting panel with really, really interesting discussions. We had to take in tools and objects that sort of clarified what we were doing. And we found out after 4 hours of discussion, lots of coffee, cake, and lunch, that we actually have a lot in common in how we approach things and how we examine things and interpret things and contextualize things. And I think that will be followed up, so keep an eye open on that, because it is it's a very nice example of this interdisciplinary thinking and working, and that we also as conservators need to think outside the box, because there is a lot of other things going on there which are very useful and very interesting for your profession. And especially with all these new techniques, we need to really engage with that. So that was me, and I hand over to Wendelin. Thank you.
36 years ago, after having completed a bachelor's degree in art history at Skidmore College, I started working in the art library at Harvard University, housed in the Fogg Art Museum. It was there, after a visit to the 3rd floor where the Conservation Center was housed, that I realized, like a lightning bolt, the direction I wanted to pursue. So I started volunteering in the painting studio 1 day a week, which changed into a full-time job at the Conservation Center, a perfect place to begin a career in conservation. Although my job title was administrative assistant, in many ways I was more of a personal assistant to Marjorie Cohn than the director of the Conservation Center. This was a demanding learning experience. She was a powerhouse, a great paper conservator, a curator, director, and a teacher. Perhaps the most interesting and fun task was being her assistant for the Harvard Rothko mural publication. This exposure to relevant and persistent issues concerning the complexities of exhibiting significantly damaged or altered artworks was formative to my way of thinking. Another job was to organize parts of the extensive archives, a great introduction to the history of conservation, restoration, and specifically conservation science. I also reorganized and cleaned the entire conservation library, absorbing as much as I could during this rather dirty process. The exposure to the important role of analytical and technical investigation in our profession was therefore ingrained from the start, alongside with the value placed on working with curators from the museum who regularly were at the Conservation Center for discussions. There were many great role models, like Paul Whitmore, who tried to tutor me in organic chemistry, much to his dismay, and also Kate Olivier and Terry Hensick in the paintings department, who helped me eventually with the decision of which program to attend, which was in the end NYU, New York University, the Institute of Fine Arts. Doing 2 master's degrees at the same time in a highly competitive environment in New York was not the easiest path, but I've never regretted it. Having a firm basis in art history is, in my opinion, essential for my role as conservator and restorer. The Institute places an emphasis on connoisseurship, not only in an art historical sense, but in the technical sense with material and technique issues. And to quote, connoisseurship differs from other more purely theoretical approaches in its insistence that all hypotheses must constantly be tested against the reality of the physical work of art. Peggy Ellis, director of the Conservation Center, and Diane Dwyer-Modestini certainly set a good example for us. I often think about how important it is to have excellent role models. For the 3rd year, I did an internship with Diane in her private studio, who worked on amazing paintings, and Mario Modestini would stop by often to discuss ongoing treatments. This experience as well has had a lasting influence. For my final year, I went to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam for a full-time internship with Cornelia Perez, and was then fortunate to receive a Samuel Kress Fellowship for 1.5 years, to be divided between the Van Gogh and Kröller-Müller museums. This was a valuable experience, and I was able to work with curators and to publish a few articles about the paintings I was working on. There was also an emphasis in the studio on research and on technical research. Before this ended, I was offered a contract job at the Rijksmuseum, where I stayed for 3.5 years with a focus on Dutch Golden Age painting. I then decided to leave to work as an independent conservator in Rotterdam with Annetje Boersma, mostly on paintings from Museum Boijmans from Beuningen. After a couple of years, I left to work independently for the Rijksmuseum, which lasted a bit more than 5 years and gave me time to establish myself and my studio, now in The Hague. Then when the projects for the Rijksmuseum were winding down, the Boijmans started taking off. And it was later on, when working on the Surrealist collection, that I started to work with Katrien Koenen, who's now at the Rijksmuseum and head of science, on metal oxide degradation in the works of Salvador Dali. This branched out. I worked also with Jaap Boon on metal soap degradation in artworks by Francis Picabia and Carol Appel, among others. There have been many interesting and challenging treatments because of Boijmans, from the Impressionist through modern and contemporary. And I will say that a lot of what we've done in the past 20 years has been preventive conservation. So it's not all big treatments, but a lot of essential work, particularly for a museum that loans on a massive scale. So it's very, very important work that we're doing. I feel that I try to be active in keeping up with the profession. As a private studio, there's always a juggling time, but I attend courses, I host workshops like Chris de Vroedis or Jim Bernstein. As well as attending them, I go to conferences, I give lectures. All of these things help me to clarify and justify the decisions I make concerning treatments. And I consider it essential, part of being a professional. I'm fortunate to be able to teach one-on-one with interns, which which I've had in the studio for the last 15 years. In fact, 3 of them are here: Raphael, Mariana, and Kimberly. And let me see, sorry. Oh yes, sometimes I do grading for the exams for the University of Amsterdam students. And since the start of the master's program, I've been on the advisory board of this as well, which keeps me involved in issues concerning students. Our graduate and postgraduate students at Redivivis come from diverse European and American training programs. They're all very varied individuals, all intelligent and motivated, but coming from different backgrounds, as has been pointed out earlier. So I just was going to say some kind of generalizations about my experience. Sometimes, for example, there will be students who have excellent manual skills. This is very often a kind of personal thing. Some people have that tendency more than others. But what I notice kind of missing is how to use those skills for conservation purposes in the students. So I don't mean missing, but it could be more part of the curriculum in some training programs. So emphasis on the craft of our profession. So when talking to students about this, some say, oh, we have too much experience and not enough technical, analytical research. So I understand that finding a balance is not easy. I would also say that one thing, and it has to do kind of with respect and understanding for our tools and materials and equipment, is how important I think it is that people really understand pigments. If you're in paintings, so this I'm really talking about paintings conservation here. So the difference between opaque and transparent is fairly obvious, and most people know this. But the more subtle differences between semi-transparent and semi-opaque is not, I don't see that very often. I say, what color green is that? Oh, I don't know, it's green. Well, it should be either earth green or chrome green or dye-based, or, I think everybody should know their pigments backwards and forwards. And that takes time and doing a lot of practice. Time and practice. The technical imaging skills, we all know how important technical imaging is now. These are fantastic, and the level is usually quite high with the students. But the really important thing, and I think you were mentioning this, is what is the question? What do you want to show? Because having tons of data is not really useful for anybody. What you need is data with some goal or purpose. Sometimes research for the sake of research, of course, is extremely valuable. So I don't mean to denigrate that. But what I mean is, in a practical sense, it's very useful to know the right questions to ask. And so some focus on that would be, I think, excellent. It's a little bit getting back to the issue as well of connoisseurship. And it seems like when I discuss this in the studio, sometimes it's seen as a little bit of an old-fashioned kind of thing. And I don't think it's at all old-fashioned. I think it's extremely relevant. And so I would like to see that word kind of come back into use in some way, or come up with technical art history is used, which is kind of part of what connoisseurship is now. And but anyway, it is just a word, but I think it's a very useful word, which is part of the reason why I made this foundation within the studio, which is for technical imaging and non-destructive analysis, like XRF, for example. Because I want to be able to ask the questions, but also answer them in the studio, not with a big time in between, because in a private studio, we don't have that time. We very often have to keep things moving, and if we don't document all this information that we find, it is lost to history. And that's a shame, because in museums, the documentation goes in somewhere, and maybe somebody can find it again, hopefully, in the future. But in a private studio, it's more complicated. And I think this is part of the reason why I want to do this foundation, and I'm so kind of excited about it. And lastly, there are enormous opportunities in this, the rapidly expanding art world, for people who have a firm understanding of preservation, restoration, conservation. There's so many different directions, like what you were saying, that you can go in when you have this knowledge. So it doesn't mean you're going to end up being a practical restorer, but I would be very optimistic about the skills that you do gain in your endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwendolyn. Thank you, Emma, as well, for those inspiring stories about what lies before you, ladies and gentlemen. My story is slightly different. As Gunnar was saying, I had a bit of a life before conservation, such a world exists. I have a theology degree. I very nearly got sucked into a merchant bank, and thank my father to this day, saying, "You sure you want to do that?" Fathers are very useful. And I ended up, in a sense, defaulting to teaching, not teaching conservation. I was teaching actually Latin and Greek and French in what they call in Australia an outward bound school. So I left England to get some time out and ended up in a beautiful place looking after 16-year-olds who were being put through a tough year to understand what initially was post-pubescent life was like, I'm afraid to be honest. That's what it was all aimed at, putting boys in a very tough environment. But that allowed me some reflection on the fact that banking certainly wasn't for me. And I had done a lot of woodwork at school, up to a level in England we call City and Guilds, which is in a sense, a cabinet-making qualification. And I'm also a musician, and so harpsichord making became my great ambition. Now, any budding harpsichord makers out there, forget it. There's not a lot of career opportunities. Lovely idea, but it's not going to make you very much money. So long and short of it, I came back to the UK and went through the Westdean Furniture Conservation training course, and then worked in London. And from there, got a position as a furniture conservator at a museum called the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney, which is a museum of applied arts and sciences. and I just want to talk about, in a sense, where I've gone from there. There's a New York bestseller author, in fact, he's a journalist that writes for them, called Malcolm Gladwell. He's written a number of well-known books. Some of you may come across one called Blink, another one called Tipping Point, and another called Outliers. Outliers is a really interesting book because it takes as its premise the fact that this is not about coming up with all these self-help books about how to become great. And the things like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of CEOs or things like that. He says, forget it all. It's actually about being in the right place at the right time. And in a sense, and cites all these cases from the vastly wealthy American 19th century families like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, who are in the right place at the right time to make vast money, the Gettys, through to the tech giants of Bill Gates and Steve Bezos and Amazon, things like that, who again were at that critical moment of personal computers. That's actually the moment, the defining moment that made Bill Gates' money was the personal computer, meaning you could take a computer home and work on it in your office and not have to go into a big IBM mainframe computer to program things. Now, look, there's a bit of that, but my story to you is, in fact, you make your own luck as well. Yes, be in the right place at the right time, but you've got to take the opportunities that come your way, and to do that, you've got to work at it. So just talking a little bit about what I did. So I rock into a town I don't know called Sydney, Australia, and with a position in a major museum there. So first of all, what I did is I banged on the door of the heads of conservation and all the other art institutions in that place, the libraries and the museums there, to say hello and understand what they were doing. So in a sense, I got to know the key players in that market. Secondly, I then joined every organization I could that was related. So it was our professional organization. In Australia, it's AICCM, but I joined IIC then. I joined AIC, the American Institute of Conservation, the Canadian Institute of Conservation, ICON in the UK, used to be UKIC. Exactly as Anne was saying, getting on board very early with our professional organization, because it immediately introduced me to my colleagues in that space. I also joined a lot of, in a sense, allied organizations like National Trust, both in Australia and England. I visited all the teaching schools in Australia. There's only 2, so that's quite easy. In fact, there was only 1 at that time. It's even easier. But it got to know who was coming through and where the teaching was going. And then I joined the allied organizations, like the Museums Association in Australia, the American Alliance of Museums, as it's now called, AAM, the Museums Association in the UK. I joined ICOM. ICOM, Committee for Conservation, obviously is, in a sense, the parallel organization that we all know about that we belong to. I also joined ICOMOS, the International Council on Outdoor Monuments and Sites, which I'm sure you all know. I've spent a lot of my career actually in the built heritage space, and that allowed me to, in a sense, see conservation from a little bit outside and meet conservators in the building world, of which, as we know, there are very many, and Thomas is going to talk about his overlap, I'm sure, in that space. Critically, then, I worked out the organizations that I was really core to, and that was AICCM, our local conservation organization in Australia. I joined the local council of that. I became treasurer very fast. I then became the editor of the technical bulletin and, in due course, the newsletter. And the way Australia works is that we have our states, and then we have the federal bodies as well. So I worked my way up through the state organizations and then into the federal organizations. That's been fundamental to my life as a conservator, being right in the middle of the professional organizations. And that then led me in due course to IIC. I was a member of IIC, but Australia put up its hand to host the biennial Congress in 2000, same year that Sydney hosted the Olympics, so it was a big year around. And I then chaired that organization that put on the I was going to say chair the organisation put the Olympics on. No, I did not. I chaired the organisation that put on IIC in Melbourne, and that introduced me to the whole IIC Council, and I became a fellow, and I did a term of 2 terms. We do 3-year terms, of which we can only do 2 on council. Came off there and thought that was my IIC bit done. I'd still remain a fellow. And then the president of IIC at the time, Jerry Padani, who's based at the Getty, called me and said, actually, we've got an organization called the Opportunities Fund, which is a body that, a funding body that we have within IIC to support organizations that can't always afford to be part of IIC. We need somebody to take that on. Would you come back in a vice presidential role to really get some energy behind that, which I was very glad to do. So I was back in the fold again there. And then we decided at IIC that we needed to be better at communications. We set up a position there as Director of Communications, and I took on that role. And hey, here I am as president. So all things are possible, ladies and gentlemen. And it's I use very carefully thought through the words richly rewarding. It has been an immensely and richly rewarding journey to be a part of that. So bang on every door, get involved in your local organizations and see where that goes. Then off the back of that, of course, comes allied organizations and allied opportunities. As I said, I've always been interested in the contextual side of the fact we work very largely in the museums and galleries space. So I became the treasurer of the Museums Australia at one stage. I became onto the board of the National Trust. So I saw a lot and got to know a lot about house museums. And that led me into an odd little world, which is it's very English, and it's got a spin-off in Australia called ADFAS, the Australian NADFAS, the National Association of Decorative and Fine Arts Societies, which is a very big body in the UK, and they have an Australian spin-off called ADFAS. And I started lecturing for them. I love talking about what we do. And that then led me eventually to becoming vice president and then president of that. It's a great organization that essentially is about arts education. So I've met a whole lot of people through that. That in turn led me to a private arts foundation in Adelaide from a very rich man who had built an extraordinary collection of English Regency and French Empire furniture and decorative arts, which he then bequeathed to a foundation, and I ended up as chairman of that. That's the great thing about that is it's got a heap of money, and it's amazing what you can do with money in a foundation. That is no story to you, but it is a very exciting organization to see what we can do to leverage off that extraordinarily generous bequest. The other strand, I suppose, that I've followed is the ICOMOS one. Very early on, I was asked to be part of planning for Australia's little bit of Antarctica, which is called Mawson's Hut in a very wild place called Commonwealth Bay. Very, very few people have been to Commonwealth Bay. And that's where Australia grabbed a great chunk of Antarctica. We've got the biggest claim of all countries. We claim about a third of it. Very few people recognize that claim, so it actually means very little. Antarctica is governed by a thing called the International Antarctic Treaty, which is the most successful of all international treaties. That then led me to planning around what we do with the artifacts as an objects conservator in that hut. And that led me into a journey to the much bigger story of British Antarctic history, which goes from 1899, when a man with a very un-British name of Karsten Borchgrevink said, I think somebody could last an Antarctic winter. And he planted a hut in a place called Cape Adare, which is the most remote and the most difficult place to be in Antarctica, and survived a winter just there, building what is in fact the only building on any continent on Earth which is humankind's first imprint. It's still there, just again. It's a very remote place. Off the back of Karsten's work, then a man called Ernest Shackleton, a great hero of mine, went down with Captain Scott in 1901 for an initial expedition, all trying to get to the pole. And sorry, sounds like I'm doing a lecture on Antarctica, doesn't it? But it's a place I love in terms of what it's led to. In terms of understanding cold climate conservation. So We've ended up with 4 huts that we've conserved about 20,000 artifacts in. We've had 80 conservators from around the world working through the winter down there. They work at Scott Base, which is the New Zealand base, and then we bring artifacts also back up into New Zealand, where it's all based. Through this funny triangulation of who owns what, New Zealand has the little bit where all these huts now sit, so we do all the work out of there. Now, so where is that done? That's led me down a route into a really interesting area of cold climate conservation and a whole pile of techniques which we've developed and have been able to spread much more broadly into the international conservation sphere. And again, immense satisfaction around that process of being part of those programs. So as Emma and Gwendolyn have both said, you've got to be engaged. So join your local organizations, talk to all your colleagues constantly, participate in dialogues, put up papers for conferences, go to conferences, join congresses as they occur. I've spread more broadly. I had a period when every exhibition opening I was ever invited to, I went to, and it was a slog. You think exhibition openings is actually having a nice drink and looking at beautiful things. Now, when they keep on coming, I thought, do I really want to go to another one? It sounds tedious, but in fact, the network that's come from that has been immensely valuable. Also, think a little about the allied skills you need. Early on, I did an accounting course, which actually has been, I was commuting to London. I had ultimately a 2-hour commute each way, and I thought, let's use this profitably. And an accounting course has set me up very well. I'm very numerate as a result, which running my own business has helped. I love public speaking, and I've done it all my life, but public speaking is something that you do need to learn skills on, and again, it's so good to be able to articulate what you do and to take that on board. I think also there's a couple of other broader issues I'd just like to take to you. Understand the cultural nuances of this profession. It's a very close profession. We all do the same thing, but there are real nuances around the way we're taught, so that, for instance, the US tends to have a very strong critical component in the way it teaches conservation. The UK tends to have a very strong critical component the way it teaches. The US, I would say, is sort of more proactive and entrepreneurial in the way it teaches. Australia's got a sort of can-do approach, I think, to conservation. New Zealand, there's no New Zealanders here, but New Zealand has got cross-cultural conservation really nailed. The Maori white linkage in New Zealand is very advanced anyway, but they really understand how you look after those cross-cultural nuances. Europe, I take my hat off to you for the level of technical competence, and hearing Emma and Gwendolyn talk about the work that they do, this is such a center of technical competence in the way you're taught here. Now, let's all become homogenous. Let's keep those nuances, but go and work in other continents and other countries and bring the skills and the way you're taught to the way you do that. I was talking to one of you on a tour this morning who's saying they want to get out of Cologne and go and work overseas, not because it's any better, but because it gives them access to these different nuances, their ability to be part of it all, and to understand where their approach brings a different approach to how you look at things. So we do the same thing, but we do it remarkably differently and with different approaches through it. Thirdly, and finally, I just want to put to you that don't underestimate our ability to have a wider influence. And Adrian was asking me beforehand what I've seen in 40 years in terms of the differences of people coming out of college. And I would say context. I think you are a much more contextualizedly informed group of people. I think Conservatives used to be accused of this great word of being myopic, that they concentrated on the detail. I think Conservatives are far less myopic now. I think you see where this all fits. And I really applaud your ability to do that. Keep communicating and understanding that whether it is in the environmental debate, whether it's in details of air conditioning, you don't have to know how air conditioning units work, but you need to be able to sit at the table with other people in your museums and put the case for why air conditioning standards and things like that are so critical to what you look after and how its effect on them is so important to understand. Justify your position there by being the fact that you can talk articulatedly. I mean, really, as Emma was saying, that her work has been so grounded in being a great paintings conservator, and then to have that broader confidence to talk more broadly about other aspects of allied areas in which she works. So, 3 things: get involved, understand the nuances of what we do, and be part of the bigger conversation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
So thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm going to present you my career path, or more some preparation steps I took to become a freelancing stone conservator. Because I just finished my master thesis, and therefore still being halfway in the university, my situation is kind of comprehensible to some of you, I hope. My way was luckily very single-strained and focused on becoming self-employed. I started with a 1-year internship at a little studio for stone conservation to take a first look into the profession and if it's my kind of thing. I was quickly amazed by the diversified and demanding work on valuable objects of art, and so I decided to become a stone conservator. After finishing my internship, I was lucky that my boss held out that I could undertake his studio after graduating from university. So I already knew that employed jobs are very rare and not well paid in our field, and that I prefer the manual work on site. So establishing an own business became my future plan right from the start. To strengthen manual skills and basic knowledge about stones and technologies, I decided to invest 3 more years of education by learning the craft of stonemasonry at a company specialized in monument preservation. For my specific way, this was very useful because I learned a lot about the processes on site and about craftsmen and how to deal with their often rough manners and about how stone objects are made in the first place. But if you want to work preferably in a lab or not in the building preservation field like I am, this isn't very useful or necessary, and you should use your time for internships accordingly to your goal. While this learning time, I met my good friend and colleague Theo, who had the same plans as me, and so we decided to found our own business together later. Founding together means more communication between the partners and the need for making compromises, but the advantages overweight for us. We will share the insecurities and risks of the first years, and for each partner, it is possible to go into vacation or just being ill without closing the company for the time. We are also specialized in different ways and can work the double amount of jobs, and starting a family is also easier this way. So our plan was very loose at the beginning, but we stuck to it and constantly worked toward this aim. First, we worked a lot besides the studies, mostly in the big breaks, but to gain further knowledge about different materials and technologies. This is something I can generally recommend. While you are studying, find out for yourself what and how you want to work in the future. And if you're unsure about it, do different internships in different facilities or even in different countries. And this way you formulate an aim for yourself and bring a first light into your unclear future. And once you got this, you have something to work towards too. And find out which skills you already have and which still needs improvement to reach this goal, and educate yourself into this way. But of course, mostly focus on your studies and learning the basic knowledge here you're going to need in every kind of job. For finding a job, I can only tell you about my way. I worked as a freelancer right from the start, because the bureaucratic hurdles in Germany are very little, and the most bosses simply cannot afford to employ you. And first I worked for my internship boss because we still had a friendly relationship, and I just had to call him. And if he hadn't enough to do, he recommended me to other colleagues of him, or I just searched for other companies and visited them or called them to get a job, and so my network kept growing. And I'm also well connected to my fellow students, and we always help each other out if somebody needs a job, because we all know the struggles about that. Yeah, after some years, I had then some fixed and some more loose contacts. I can call and get a job and get invited in national and international projects. Reliability, loyalty, and a good friendly connection to the bosses are very important here. The work on site can be very challenging, so you have to be physical loadable, and you need to be willing to travel for work because the sites aren't coming to you. And in our conservation field, so monument preservation, it is also necessary to work a lot in the summertime because the most materials can't be used and working outdoors isn't possible over long terms in cold conditions. So you have to earn the money for the whole year in about 8 months, what means work times of minimum 10 hours per day and often 6 days a week. So for my first jobs, I wasn't picky and took everything I got, even if it wasn't paid well, because the experiences were more important to me. Nowadays, I choose some jobs also if they are underpaid, if they deal with a difficult object or a specific technique I want to know. But I mostly make clear that my specialized skills and qualified work on sensible and unique objects has its value my bosses have to pay. Yeah, to be clear, the profession of conservation is very idealistic and not something to gain much money with, but it has to be enough for a living. So if your boss isn't paying well or doesn't raise it with the time, and if he isn't paying punctually, you have to criticize the situation, demand a change first, but if nothing happens, you have to quit and search for another. Shortly, back to studies, I recommend that you choose your thesis topic according to your future plan also. To widespread my portfolio, I chose different materials, a modern artificial one, concrete, and an ancient used natural stone, marble. And to consolidate my knowledge about working on site, I also decided to work on practical topics on real objects instead of pure researching topics. But if you want to work in the scientific field and lab or planning to become a PhD student, you should certainly choose other topics. Besides studying and working, I engaged myself in professional organizations, preferably in the German VDR and in the student section, what I can highly recommend also. They are very active in the occupation policies and present our not so well-known profession to society, how you said. And they arrange many useful conferences and meetings and seminars where you can learn about new topics, about soft skills like economic patterns, and meet and befriend other conservators, and they're gonna ask you later if you stand at this podium here and talk about your professional development. Yeah. For running an own business, it was also essential to attend special seminars and conferences dealing with the topic of becoming self-employed. Especially knowledge about economic patterning, possible forms of companies, calculation and planning of treatments and sites in general, planning and building laws and taxes, which insurances I'm gonna need, which marketing concept is useful and furthermore is needed. I know it sounds very much kind of boring and maybe frightening, but if you have a future plan right from the start, you have a lot of time to prepare for it and being more self-confident thereof. Also, Theo and I formulated a business plan together in which we defined and adhere our company concept, the spectrum of our working field, which clients we want to work for, and the ethical claim of our work, and so on. And this framed our firstly loose idea of becoming self-employed and gave us an agenda we can stick to. Yeah. And the last big topic, how it was already mentioned, is to keep the will of never-ending learning and exploring, because there's so much research going on in our field, and visit conference like here and seminars, especially on topics you are unsure about, to lose the fear about it. We on the university even organized further education by ourselves. If one of our fellow students knows a special technique, we build up a little group, and the specialist organized materials, tools, and information sheets, and the rest paid a little sum for them. And the room were always provided by our university in the big breaks, or even on the weekends. This was never a problem. So you learn new topics in a befriended little group. Yeah. So stay in touch with other conservators whom you can address if you can't find a solution in a case, need an advice, or just a job. And you already did a step in the right direction by being here and settle for your future as an emerging conservator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma, Gwendolyn, Julian, and Thomas, for all your inspiring reflections. And I may guess that there are a number of questions that you have raised with your presentations, and I would like to open the discussion directly to the whole floor. And in case you have a question, please raise your hand. We have micros and these will be moved around, and please state your name briefly and ask what you would like to know. If you have a question. There's the first hand. There's a mic, just a second, and then state your name and where you're from, and then, yeah.
Thanks. I'm Virginia. I'm from Schal Institution, just coming for a visit. My question's about funding, and I know it's a bit of a dirty word almost with conservation, and it seems to me that it's getting more and more difficult these days to find the funding to do these opportunities that many people have to be quite lucky to find, to attend the conferences, to join local organizations, to kind of find these volunteer positions. And I mean, especially in London where I was training, it's difficult to justify with yourself to do these low-paid or non-unpaid conservation positions, and then also think about paying rent and bills. So my question was more about how did you all manage to kind of fund yourselves through the difficult times?
Long pause here. Look, I think it's a question of priorities, really. I think, let me first pick up on the fact that I appreciate when I joined all these organizations and I was listing them, that was an option which I don't think is there now anymore, because you actually have to make the decision where you're going to apply your subscription pound or dollar or euro. And that's one component of that. And we've certainly found at IIC that in the older days, people used to join ICOM-CC, IIC, and their local ICON or VDR, things like that. It doesn't happen anymore. People say, well, I'm going to join my state or countrywide organization or international. Let me turn that round the other way. I think membership organizations are actually on the decline, and IIC is very conscious of that. We've had a falling membership for about 20 years, and we're looking at all times of how we can stabilize and build it up again to allow people to be part of us. I'm sending this coming from a different angle, I'm afraid. But let me say, we recognize that you do actually have to make the decision with things like subscriptions, which is a part of this, to where you're going to apply that. And I think what you've got to do is to do that in the most useful way you think it is going to be career-based. And that depends on how active your local organization is around. So that's one component part of that. In terms of funding to go to conferences and things like that, I mean, ultimately, we just used to fund it ourselves. And I have seen in my working life more of a dependence on institutions being expected to fund people to attend. And I think you've actually got to, again, work out with your budgets where you think that's going to be best spent, and not rely on organizations to fund you to get to it. I mean, people like the Getty are fantastic in terms of how they do support individuals to go to congresses and conferences, but we did hard yards, and I mean, let me be frank, I have 4 children, and I look at them in terms of, in a sense, their disposable income, and it's way above what I had at my age. And we made decisions in a way that were around life choices. And as I said to you, it's been very rewarding where those have gone. But I don't think you can rely anymore on organizations funding you to do these things. You've got to work out how you can use your own resources to be part of that. I know that's probably a hard thing to say, but I think that's what I've seen more and more.
I would like to just counter that in a way, to say that the Erasmus program has been very, very good. Many of our students have come with Erasmus grants, and then we match that. So that, I mean, it's not a lot of money, but it does end up being enough, you know, to do an internship. We try and help with transport and things. So that it makes it possible, not easy. Often I think the interns try to get help from their parents or from another source as well, in order that they can do more things, you know, and which is understandable. At the Institute, New York University, they give a travel stipend, so that helps enormously. It's quite generous, and so when I was a student, I had funding for internships.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something different from the other side. So institutions that, for example, organize conferences where the fees can be quite high, and they're getting higher and higher, to be perfectly honest. And it's really important that there is a student fee. So we organize quite a lot of conferences in Glasgow, but also in Amsterdam. And what is really important is that the student fee is a nominal fee, so only costs what, you know, the actual coffee, lunches, because that's what you have to charge for. So we had £25 student fee and £200 normal fee. And then students would come. But if we would have that, not have that, they wouldn't come because it's just too expensive. So I think there's also a task for institutions, museums, who organize conferences on conservation and invite the students and young conservators for a lower fee. And so that's one thing. Another thing is there's still quite a lot of work to be done on the pay for conservators. In museums, in many museums, conservators are paid less than the curators, for example, which is rather odd because in terms of training, they have at least the same kind of years of training, if not more, right? And so I can say that the Rijksmuseum, so yeah, I'm sorry, but the Rijksmuseum pulled that together, and 2.5 years ago, the salaries of the conservators were pulled up to the same level as the curators. But that's quite rare. And I think that is something that should be much more looked at by all our organizations, you know, to stimulate that and make that better. So there's still all kinds of things to be done to improve certain things where also interns are paid better, and this volunteering thing that is coming up again everywhere should be counteracted, because that's not very good for the field, and also it should not be done. You know, people should be paid if they do work. So.
If I could leave my position as moderator for a minute, I would also like to add, because I've come so much feel connected to that question. When I graduated in '92 and I was interested to go to London, I got the opportunity by the Tate to do an internship there, but they said, "We are really sorry, we cannot pay you." And so I had the difficulty how to survive in London, and so what I want to express, times were difficult already at that time. Fortunately, I went to an international conference. It was the IIC conference in 1990 in Dresden, and there I talked to a lady who was just about to set up a foundation to support conservation. And so when I got the confirmation from Tate to do that, I contacted her whether she could support that. She said, "Well, financially it's a bit difficult now, but you can stay in my flat." So what I want to say now is go to conferences, try to network, go to openings of museums and galleries and try to connect, and sometimes it works out. Right, more questions? Yeah. Is there a mic?
Hi there, I'm Chris. I'm from Durham University. Just going back to what you were saying about Erasmus, I was very lucky enough to be possibly one of the last lot of students in England to get Erasmus. We're not sure how that's going, so I could study abroad. But now that I've sort of coming up to graduation, and I'm looking at moving into the industry. There is also that topic of how to keep the lights on and food on the table prior to getting these first conservation jobs. I was wondering if there's any sort of lines of work that you would recommend trying to get into that might be slightly easier, but perhaps lower paying, that would help build up a CV that would be impressive to getting conservation jobs later. Would it be something like, for example, I've worked on the front of house in museums, but is there something sort of more practical that we can do to build our skills whilst also working towards getting into conservation fuller time?
It's interesting, picking up your point of working front of house. I think that certainly the Australian experience is that we're suffering a bit at the moment from too many students coming out in terms of the positions that are available. And what is clear is that the training that is being given, and that comes back to my point about Conservators no longer being, in a sense, having a broader context in what they're doing, working in allied areas. And I must shamelessly say I've enjoyed so much my career in the broader issue of how museums and galleries operate. And it sets you up, and coming back to Gunnar's point, it introduces you to people that lead you to other opportunities. So I think don't feel afraid of going into a non-conservation specific role in the broader space of museums and galleries that will allow you then to get back in from another direction to pay the bills, because that's what's got to be done. So don't limit yourself to where that's taking you. I think that's what I would respond to.
That's a tough one. I think, and this is so incredibly unlike me, because I've never taken a business course in my life, but maybe it's a good idea, because as a private studio, it has to function as a business. And I run the business side intuitively, not the best way probably, but I get a lot of help from people who are very good at it. And that's really essential. So having that skill might make you a little bit different. And maybe that's useful.
Sorry, one other comment. The default position at one level is to go back to university and do another round of postdoc work or doctorate work. The pattern seems to be that you're no more employable when you come out, or marginally more. Now, many of us actually sort of veer in thinking we'd actually like a life in academia, in research, and that does make sense. But I would think fairly hard about just doing more study for the sake of it makes you more employable, because I don't think the stats show that. I may have some people that would disagree with that.
I agree with that. I mean, I'm in academia, and it's not that there is more employment there. It's in the arts and humanities. It's a difficult field, and that's the same for any student from that background. We have several people who, students who come out of the program have the same question as you had, and they find a job for 3 days a week to keep them going, and in the other 2 days they volunteer with a conservation project or in a museum, get a foot in the door that way. And then if there's a project coming up, they're there on the right time, in the right place, as we heard you say. That's really important. It can be a long haul, right? So you might go from project to project to project, but at one point there might be an opportunity. That's how I did it, and that's how many people still are doing it. So if you're really motivated, really engaged, you will get there. But it can be that you're very lucky, that you're in that right time and place soon. But you never know that, of course, in advance. But I'm very convinced that if you really motivated, in the end, you will come. That moment will come. But it depends on how you see that. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Amber Kerr. I'm Chief Conservator at the Smithsonian American Art Museum and on the IIC Council. And I would say that when I work with students, first off, I'm always seeking the funding to try and be a paid internship, because I truly believe that you should be paid for your time. So when an intern comes, I try to find the funding, or if I can't find the funding for them and they really want the experience, I try to find local conservators who can offer them up outside activities and earning experiences in the area of Washington, D.C., so that they may put in a little bit of extra time, as you were talking about. Sometimes you're working this 10-hour day, 6 days a week. But it's getting them experience, and most importantly, it's connecting them with a broader network. And again, this idea of getting to know even more people, because we're such an intimate field, we like to know the people we're working with. And so the more people you get to work with, the more experience, however many jobs that may be, it's actually better for you, because you're broadening who you are, you're introducing yourself, and they're going to think of you. I often think of interns, and even though they're over in Germany or the Netherlands or the UK, wherever they've come from me, I'm always thinking about them, even when we have student conferences, and trying to think of ways to always help them through their career. So if you're introducing yourself and you're gaining these experiences, it may seem really tough in the beginning, and believe me, I actually switched mid-year in my life to become a conservator, which most people looked at me like, why did you do that? Because I was in a very lucrative business at the time. But it was a quality of life, and I really love what I do, and so I try to pass that along. And I'll actually add on to a little bit of what Julian was talking about. A lot of the student memberships, including the ones for the IIC, actually do cost the institution. We have ours priced so low that we actually pay to have you be a student member. We swallow a good amount of money just to give you the opportunity. And we offer things like the Burmel Fund to actually fund you coming to an IIC conference. And especially if you have a poster or you're looking to present, this is where, again, going into those conferences, they will often find you the money to get there, especially if you're stepping out to bring what you're studying and doing to that institutional body, because hearing about your research is really important to conservators. They love hearing what's up and coming, what's happening in your universities, and it's really important for you to do that outreach. So look for that funding on those sites. We have funding with the IIC. We take a cut in the student memberships just to be able to give you that opportunity, and I know that's equally across for the AIC and many other organizations. So pay close attention to that, and don't be afraid when you're in an internship to say, do you know anybody privately that I can work with maybe on weekends and get that additional experience?
Hi, my name's Lisa. I'm from the University of Melbourne and I'm a student. First of all, I just want to do a quick plug. Emily and I are from the AICCM Emerging Conservators SIG, and it strikes me that it's a great opportunity for us all to get to know each other. So I'd like to create a database list of emails in case, or perhaps we could get the one from the IIC. Because if anyone was going to come to Australia, I have a spare bedroom. So I feel like that other people might be in this situation, so you've got to travel a lot, you might get a job somewhere else, but it's really expensive to stay somewhere. So perhaps this is an opportunity to do that. But my question is about advocacy. So it strikes me that as emerging conservators and students, we can harness new technologies or existing ones that other conservators might not use, like social media and podcasting. And that would be great for communicating the value of conservation. But in terms of communicating or advocating for greater pay in the conservation world, which we've probably all seen that spreadsheet that came out in America recently, is there something that students can do to help advocate for that, or do you think that's something more at a sort of institutional level? Sorry, that's quite complicated.
Oh, well, I'll launch into that one. Thank you for the issue. My nephew's in fashion, and the fashion industry is known to be the very worst. It exists on people doing something for nothing. Everybody comes up through it, as far as I can see, not getting paid at all. I think, as Amber says, we've got recognition that people need to be paid for what they do, and it's been a big issue in the UK, as we know, in terms of ensuring you're not leveraging off that ability to charge nothing for people that are doing work for you in the conservation world. So where does the situation sit for advocacy of salary parity around where it should be, as Emma was saying, bringing district conservators up to curator level to ensure that? I believe it sits more with us at a senior level, frankly, than what students and emerging conservators can do, because you're all grappling to get into the career in the first place. And if, as Thomas says, you're not getting paid by your employer, you've got to walk. You can't just say, well, because I just need a foot in the door, I'm going to have to grin and bear it, which is what you do in the fashion industry, frankly. So it needs the pressure. I think very clearly it needs the pressure from you lot to say this in terms of the amount of training we've been through and what we believe parity should be. We're at the wrong place. But I think it is us as leaders also that have got to continue to plug that route. Do you want to comment, Thomas, on that?
Just that the VDR is very active in this field, and they're aware of this problem, but it's only a German solution, so I don't know how the IIC is involved in that. Maybe if you want to tell something about it, no. No, yeah. So we are very lucky about it that you made the statistic about Germany. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Emily. I'm the co-convener of the Emerging Conservators SIG with Lisa in Australia. I just want to know, when you're talking about, to continue on, when you're talking about advocating for pay and conditions, are you advocating to museums or are you advocating to governments, or which bodies are you advocating to specifically, and where are you targeting that energy?
Are you able to talk from your experience? Are you able to talk from your experience of how curators and conservators got level?
Well, what happened in Amsterdam was an internal decision where they pulled up the pay of the conservators to the same level as the curators. So that was something that internally was decided at one point and approved, but that didn't happen overnight, as you can imagine. So it was a long process that had nothing to do with other pressures, or that was more an internal situation. But I do think that the big organizations like ICOMCC and IIC and so on have a task there to guard that the situation for pay for conservators. It will have to happen in institutions, because they have usually a certain way of paying, that's all regulated. And within those regulations, then that's within that regulation, the pay in the Rijksmuseum was pulled up. And that sets a tone, and for other situations in the Netherlands and other museums, but also in private conservation, I would say. So it's a local situation. So, but I do think there needs to be some initiative, more initiative. But I think that students can definitely help with that, because you can also get together and organize yourselves and play a part in improving circumstances and outcomes like that. Yeah, I'm sure. But it is, in the end, institutional level, I think, where the decisions are being made on that. Yeah.
Okay, hi, I'm Ushirina. I'm from Lithuania, and I just recently decided to change my profession from being a teacher into being a conservator. And it's pretty interesting looking into it from further, like outside the bubble. And I just noticed this thing that was never occurring to me, that when I'm in a museum and I'm looking at an artifact, you never see the name of the restorator who helps to bring the artifact to life. And in the center that I was doing internship in, they were already asking the director, hey, could we maybe put our name there? And he was like, definitely, let's start putting attention to it. And I wanted to ask, what's your opinion about it? And is it a question that is being touched globally?
Well, I know the Uffizi had the labels, on the labels they had the name of the restorers. Occasionally you see it, when actually at the Rijksmuseum, when I did a large group of paintings, and my name was then on the, when you walked in, and the other restorers were really angry. So I don't know how good that was. I was flattered, but on the other hand, it was a bit awkward unless you do it all the way across. And so, yeah, so it takes quite something. And when I was at the Rijksmuseum, that discussion was ongoing already, 20 years ago, and about the pay, which just is one moment where, at this moment, maybe I could just mention as well that although I'm in my own studio, and this is not really relevant for my studio, but the issue of women and men and equity in conservation is one that I think will really be coming up, and it's up to you as emerging professionals to make sure that there is equal pay for women as for men.
I think there are different traditions in Europe that we can recognize in giving attention to the restorer, conservator, who's treated the work with a label. I think there are so many new opportunities to communicate your treatment, your intervention in other channels, that I would rather think that there's the future instead of labeling it next to the artist, where I personally also would feel maybe that's not the right relation to put the conservators' name next to the artist name on the same label, but that's a personal opinion I have. And I would like to add one more point to the discussion of the payment. I think it's a challenge for all of us, for institutions, also for the universities, as well as for private conservators, and I think we should all pull the same string. And we have recently been involved in court cases in Berlin where conservators claimed to be better paid, and we supported them here from Cologne, and we got now the information that they were successful. And we also think when we, for example, are asked what are the prices for certain technical examination or something, we are not we don't have to live on that, so we try to raise these prices and to avoid to be too low, and to rather to stimulate that we can raise that for all of our field. What I would like to say in that context is that often it is really a challenge for young professionals to enter the market, and they want to get into. They offer work for little money, and they damage the whole market by doing that. And that's a real issue. But I don't have an answer.
Yeah, it's supply and demand at one level. I'll give you a little instance of that the archaeology profession in the US had a complete reset of their rates, whereby they were charging, say, $100 an hour. This was 15, 20 years ago, for doing a standard reports on digs and things like that. And it was very lucrative. and there were a number of big companies making quite a lot of money out of it. And a new wave of archaeologists came through into the market and weren't able to get jobs, and said, we can actually do these reports at a level whereby the commissioning bodies will accept them for $50 an hour, say. And they set up as an entirely separate group and completely undermined the established archaeological groups and in a sense, calibrated what you could charge for archaeological work in the US. And it took 15, 20 years to sort of come right again. Now, the moral of that story is that the older ones have got complacent, I think, in terms of what you could charge, but in a sense, the profession was not strong enough and say, we're going to be valued enough. Actually, you do need to charge $100 an hour for that to happen. What we find in the Australian market is that there's a lot of overlap between what conservators charge commercially, and we watch each other and we leverage off each other, and it actually works reasonably well. We pull each other up. I think it's worked less well in the UK. I'm still amazed by how little UK private conservators charge and how many of them are still working bluntly into when they should be retired because you cannot make enough money out of it. Now, Gwendolyn, I'd be interested in your comment on that and your experience.
Yeah, I agree that I look to the institutions, also what they are charging for if I'm offering a salary, particularly Rijksmuseum, because it's online, so I can see exactly what that is. I do think it's unfortunate to have a wave of young, inexperienced restorers willing to work for a very small amount of money. It's very tempting for the museums that don't have the money. But it can end in tears, and we work so hard to get the rate up, then to have it kind of knocked away by the museum saying, "Oh yeah, but they've got the education, so they can do it." In the end, it hurts everybody. It hurts the profession, the young conservators who really would be better off working with somebody with much more experience. And making a reasonable amount of money. I mean, I don't think it's right to expect people to work for nothing. That is, that is certainly how I see it and how my studio sees it. But it just depends on. There's a lot of factors. So I don't know if that doesn't really elucidate much, but.
Yeah, I would recommend if you want to work as a freelancer, you have to educate yourself as in the economic field and how you said business course and stuff. So you know how you much have to earn. And in our field is often they graduated from university and then call a friend. Yeah, what do you take per hour? 15 euros, 20 euros. Okay, I do the same. And they do not know how much they need. They're gonna need 40, 50 euros per hour. So that should be the rate, but it isn't. So educate yourself into this field.
Can I just come back actually to this issue of named conservators, because that's part of it actually. It's about recognition. I mean, I always get very irritated when I see in a magazine a conservator working on that rather than a named person as the person that is doing this highly technical work. And I think it comes from the fact that we've been lumped with trades really for too long. We're back of house operations, and I think it's getting better, and it's actually places like the Getty, which is in all their magazines, whenever you see a conservative, it always says who it is, that are helping to promote that. And I also think, I mean, things like, we all know who worked on Salvator Mundi, for instance, things like that. I mean, in the old days, paintings used to come up for auction, and you'd have no idea who'd worked on them, and it's now seen as a critical part of the story of Salvator Mundi that who's actually done that work. Yeah. That's another story in itself, but from that point of view. So I think it's getting better, but we've got to work at it, because then we have a position and a sense of visibility. It's about the optics that allow us then to be able to say we're worth what we should be paid.
Yeah, I was not particularly mentioning like labeling it. Sorry. I don't think that your name has to be particularly on the tag near the author, of course. Yeah. It's just the recognition in itself, because people don't read. Like my mother doesn't read a magazine of Getty,
and she will never know the stars of conservation. So we're gonna be kind of in the loop here. So I think it's important to mention people, and it's important to have stars, I think, like pop stars. I mean, people know them, and that's why they have a lot of money. Football has Ronaldo, and that's why football has a lot of money, you know. So recognition is important, and it's important to have stars here as well. So that was my point.
Well, just one thing that I, in terms of social media, there's a similar situation going on for young curators. So it's not only the conservation profession that has this, no pay, volunteering, not paid internships. It's the same with the often curatorial positions. And some time ago, there was a post advertised in a British museum, it's not relevant which one, which was for extremely low pay, and it was a junior curator, said, so you get experience, that idea. And then social media, Twitter, it was all over, everybody was reacting, it became a big issue, and then they withdrew the advert, right? So there is definitely a discussion going on also in that area, so that is problematic in a broader sense, I would say. Going back to the labels with names or not, the audience, the public, is incredibly interested in what conservators do. And this whole idea from we go behind the scenes, I find that a bit annoying. So we shouldn't be behind the scenes, right? But anyway, it's really fascinating. And every time we post something, I blog for the studio building. So we put out all kinds of blogs on what is happening in that building. And before that, people would say, we don't know what's happening in that building. So there's all kinds of issues here where we have to communicate, use social media much more. And this public conservation treatment of the Night Watch, it is also a PR exercise, of course. You know, it's like the Mona Lisa for the Rijksmuseum idea. But at the same time, it will put a lot of attention or a lot of emphasis also on conservators and what they do. And there's lots of little interviews that go on YouTube where there's also the scientist talks and the conservator will talk, and that is something that will also help and put them in the spotlight. But and the public loves it, absolutely loves it. So I think there's this public engagement, which I mentioned already, is also something conservators should try to engage with and use social media, make little films and things. That's very easy to do. Use Instagram, you know, picture, little story. You get a huge following because it's really important. So, and that all helps to give more profile to the profession and to the individual conservator, right?
Hi, I'm Joanna. I'm a student from Poland. And as we were talking about, like, my question is gonna be from two things. Like, the first one is gonna be the wage, which is different from like wage of conservator, which will be different in different countries. And as you were saying, we should fight like unequal pay between men and women. But I find it really hard to find what is actual wage of conservator of no matter what gender in each country. Like, it's very hard for me to find it on the internet or like wherever. Like Thomas said, it would be in Germany from 20 to 30, whereas in Poland it would be like 4 euros per hour. And that's quite a lot. And but you won't find it on the internet, right? So how do you look for the information? And the other question I wanted to ask is, as we were talking about working for a private conservator, how do we know if we look, like, if we find a person, like, for example, through internet, and we want to apply for an internship or for work, how do we know if it's a good conservator? Like, we may find like a company on the internet and be like, oh wow, they do cool things. But actually, I have a friend who was doing an internship, and it was summer in Belgium, and when they finished the painting, the conservator was like, oh, and now we have to do like the signature. And she was like, what? And conservator was like, yeah, it's normal. And like everything went perfect, like the technology was good, like the paintings was good, like the techniques were good, but actually the conservator was making falsificates, right? And she didn't knew about it like earlier. So how do we know if the person for whom we're gonna work, like for free, is a good person and is gonna teach us well? And yeah, if they're not connected to any institution or
me,
like. No.
Oh, just in
I
general,
mean,
yes.
yeah, I mean, no. I mean, if the private conservator is not connected to any institution, any museum, how do we know if they're a good person and a good worker?
Well, that's a good question, but I think really you have to do your research. I mean, see what kind of publications is the person presenting at international conferences. I think it's up to the student in that case to really do the research. And as to wages, the thing what you can find on the internet are job descriptions, which will give an idea of a monthly salary or a yearly salary. That's where I would go and look. And I do look because I like to be up on it. What are people getting? You know, you want good people, so you have to pay them money, the good money. You can't say, I want the top person, but I'm not going to pay you anything. So that also doesn't work, you know. So it's research. Yeah.
I think it's also where local professional organisations come in. I mean, just as in the UK, there's the accredited Conservators system. There's also in Australia we have professional members who are working privately. So I think that's a starting point. Then you've got to use social media to ask around, really. That's the advantage of, we get far more information these days just from taking a straw poll from your fellow Conservators, whether this person has a good reputation. Hang on, you need to speak in.
But if a person have a good reputation, like if they're well known and they're connected to some like museums or institution, or they're connected to the society, there's it's gonna be harder to get an internship in a person like that because they're more popular, they're more like celebrities, we could say, right? So it's more possible, like there's a bigger possibility that someone who is not well known or less connected to people will take us for an internship. So yeah.
I accept that, but I think social media, anybody that's putting signatures on works is going to get caught up and out pretty fast, and word will be around.
Oh, and thank you.
So there's one question, I'm just going to jump in, from our social media feed. And it's from Julia Betancourt from Spain. And she's asking how to survive as a private practice with academic career, continuous learning, a huge expertise, being respected as well as that of the art conservators of public institutions by public. We're not sure if we understand the question correctly, but I think that's for our speakers. If you see a difference in between people working as a freelancer, like conservators working as a freelancer versus conservators working in public institutions, and whether there is a difference in between those two career paths, maybe?
I don't think that there should be a difference, but functionally there probably is, because often private studios have limited time to spend on research, whereas that might be very much encouraged within a museum setting. So, does that help? answer the question? I'm not sure.
The issue of freelance conservators is an interesting one because they fall into various brackets. There are those people who will spend their lives as, in a sense, contract conservators, namely that they will go from contract to contract within institutions and will seek to work, in a sense, as private conservators, but in that capacity. There are then those that will move in and out of institutions and run private commercial concerns and then go back into institutions. And there are then those who are actually running commercial practices as such, which on a slightly sort of bigger scale. And each of them has different challenges, I think, in terms of how they keep in contact with the profession and how they keep themselves up to speed. Yes, I don't think there's any easy answer to that, but it's no harder or easier in an institution or out there privately. Each has its demands, and I think I've realized that over many years. You don't think because you work privately it's harder work. It's very hard in institutions in many ways. It's just got a different nuance to it. What I think is interesting about the private issue is, I think as Thomas was alluding to, none of us have set up a business and thought, what should we do? Oh, I know, we'll do conservation. We're all conservators that have ended up actually running a business and have had to, in a sense, scabble along behind trying to think, right, well, running a business, this is what's involved. It's another set of skills that you need to pick up along the way.
There seems to be an immediate reaction, so then we can bring that in.
Rachel Sabino from the Art Institute of Chicago, and yes, having 20 years out of school and having brutally stumbled and fumbled many a late night through a private practice in London at the very beginning of my career, I'd actually like to flip the responsibility around a bit to the training programs, I have to be honest. And I don't know why it's okay for us to be expected to muddle along after. And I don't see why there can't be a business module in class. It's commendable to do it on the train, and it's commendable to have to learn it after. But in as much as we're being stared at through the lens of metrics all the time, I think it's something that speaks not so well on the programs, actually, that someone coming out can't just, in an easier way, find their way into private practice. So I'm going to kind of flip the script a little bit and say that I think just with the reality of the way things are going, I think the programs are going to have to step up and start helping people prepare themselves a bit better out the door. That's my soapbox.
Just to react briefly on that, also from the Cologne position, we have one module integrated in our curriculum that covers these issues, but that is something that is in constant discussion. To which extent do we want to include that? Because it always causes the question, what should we delete instead? How to balance that? And that's a challenge that is much bigger than this question, because our field is growing every year, every decade. Knowledge is expanded and constantly renewed, and there's a question, where do we focus on? How do we further specialize? What do we leave out in these courses? And I think that's, in comparison to what I had in my courses many years ago, so much more what is offered today. And there's the danger to some extent when we try to cover everything that we can then only be on the surface again. And so then's the question, what was said before, what is the manual skill then? Is that something what we throw back because we want to include business skills, or what is critical thinking? And so technical art history, there are so many new fields that come into, and that's something what I think is a constant challenge and will be also in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. The in a way, this is touching on all the things that we've been talking about, because then you have, I worked so hard for a museum to try to get them to value writing good reports. And it's like banging your head against a wall. And finally, I succeeded to say, really, it takes time to make a good report. It's not just the going and looking at the object. It's, the documentation, how you present it. You have an enormous responsibility. Because what if that report isn't complete and the painting is damaged? And then they come back to you and say, why didn't you, where's the report? So we know when this happened, this kind of thing. And then to come along like with the issue with kind of flooding the market with people with less experience, they come and say, oh, I'll write a report in an hour, no problem. And so, and they do that, and then at a certain point I think, this is it then. This is how it works. Go ahead, do the 1 hour, 1 hour reports, we all lose. And, so that's, it's not easy to get museums or individuals to part with their money. This is just a fact. And I find that being kind of brutally straightforward has been the way that I approach it in my discussion with my clients, to say this is a time-intensive profession. So if you're willing to pay for the time that it takes to do something right, we would love to work for you. And if not, then it's better you work with somebody else. And I just stand firm on that. And I have some fabulous clients who build relationships over many, many years. And that's based on trust and understanding. Yeah.
Just one thing. My daughter trained at the art school in glass and ceramics, and now she has just got her master's in glass and ceramics conservation. Nothing to do with me, of course, that's her own choice. However, what was really interesting when she did the art school, that they were also taught to make a business plan. Because as an artist, you also need to be able to sell your works, and that is something that's not so easy in a very competitive world. So they were really taught how to do that, and they had then to do that in practice. So they had to make an artwork this was the Glass Centre in Sunderland, and do the whole works for a public artwork, so with businessmen, etc. And it was incredibly useful for her, and it will still be very useful for her if she would go into private practice. I don't know where she will go. However, I think it should be an essential part of a conservation training program. And I know that there's a balance to be found, but I think this is really, really important. So I would really say, Gunnar, it needs to be an important part of any conservation program. Same for Amsterdam, of course. So.
Okay, I'm Ana from the Universidad Externado in Colombia. And my question is, how do you approach institutions as a young conservator to do internships or fellowships, and even more if you are from out of Europe? I mean, like, it's just some advice, because at institutions, you get so many applications and so many people. So what could make an application stand out, and what is your advice on that?
Well, I find it difficult to answer. We have internships that are usually connected to conservation programs. So establishing relationships between programs outside of Europe with institutions in Europe is one way maybe to think about that. That's a an umbrella idea, but that's something. I would say that tomorrow in the discussion in the afternoon, Patria Noble is the head of painting conservation at the Rijksmuseum. She is in the panel, and that would be a good question to repeat. because they work a lot with interns, and it will be interesting. You know, I mean, I don't do that myself. They come through the Technical Art History Masters, so that's a different route in. But that I would ask her that question and see how she responds to that. She knows the details of that. So I would refer it to tomorrow. Yeah? Or talk to her personally when she's here.
Hello, I'm Ruth from Portugal, and I'm currently doing my master thesis on the professional identity of the conservator in the case of contemporary art. And as you all said, especially you, it is an invisible job. Our job is to be invisible. And when you ask around on the streets, if anyone knows what a conservator is, nobody knows what a conservator is. They say like, you paint, right? Yeah, no. There is also echo and encore, but not everyone agrees with echo and encore. Not all countries. For example, in Portugal, there are no nice codes like in the finances when you pay your bills. It doesn't exist conservator restorer, so you have to pick something else, like a sculpture or arts and something. And what makes a good contemporary art conservator isn't necessarily the same as what makes, for example, a painting's conservator great. So there is not a consensus in the what it is to be a conservator. And so my question is, what can we do and what should be done also politically or maybe in other areas because I think all this situation and also the fact that most of us are women, it contributes to the profession to be so invisible and badly paid. So what can we do and what should be done?
Well, I mean, very interesting topic for your thesis, and very, very relevant. I think it is. I have it all the time. People don't really understand. They think you're kind of an artist who decided to do something else. You know, I mean, yeah, it's not really an understood profession. And part of the Night Watch, this is excellent, I think, initiative, because, you know, on TV you see interviews or in magazines. These are all things that help our profession. What can you do? I think then it goes back as well to the whole social media really as being critical. We're trying to be more active in the studio with Instagram, and but it takes time. This is the whole thing. Is like, and somebody has to have the kind of will to push it through, because often I'm just going all the time, and I don't maybe stop to think, listen, let's just do this now, And so it depends on individuals, and so that makes a big difference. But with the contemporary, I think it's interesting that you said you don't necessarily have the same type if you're in. Yeah, but I think you get back to just critical thinking in general is extremely important, and that might sound really easy because there's like intuitive, there's analytical, all these things are very important. But to constantly think for example, for contemporary conservation, I'm always thinking, where can it go wrong? And that sounds like negative, but by thinking of all the things that can go wrong all the time, it makes me like super aware of what I need to do for preventive conservation, which the contemporary works that we work on are largely, it is preventive conservation what we're doing. And yeah, there's the occasional restoration because there's a tear or the dog goes, whatever, does something. Then you have really just a extremely challenging restoration, perhaps because of the different materials. But also, it's just the best thing to talk to your colleagues and talk to ones who have actually been through that particular issue or problem. And I always just contact people if I hear. In fact, I contacted you once when I was working on fire damage, and you had written this paper, and this was very, very useful. And then, so these kind of things can lead to. Sorry, I swear I got really off topic here. I just realized that. Anyway, the point being, keep up with your colleagues, I guess.
Or use any form to engage with the public and to communicate what conservators do. And there are so many forms. There are not just the new media channels. Although they can reach extremely well a large community, and that's what we experienced here with our students who raised this Facebook, Instagram channel recently, and I'm impressed how many followers there are. And they put on questions that they are dealing with also in contemporary art, and that stimulates to think about what is this profession, what does it cover, where are the boundaries, where are the connections to other fields, and so that's extremely important. But also there are the traditional forms. I go to a school every year once where our son went to, and I give a talk about what a conservator does. And I realized they have no idea, of course, where from, but they take it out, and now we have the second student from that school. So it seems not, initially I thought that's not very efficient to go there, because for 3 years no one responded and they disappeared, and now we have the second one. So reach out to the public in in different forms, and that's what would be an answer from my point of view.
And just a short addenda to that, the benefit of being in the profession for 40 years and being asked exactly that question, what do you do? And it's a whole lot better than it used to be. Namely, there is a lot greater awareness around what conservators do.
It's very interesting because I remember 3 things about Lithuania and making it more popular and known. It's, for example, this project Heritas, which happens once in a year. They're inviting professionals from private and public sector, and they go to this one church and they have their posters, and they have to prepare an activity. So children and grown-ups, pensioners and adults can go there and just get to know the restorators and, for example, make a clay or restore a painting, which is, of course, not real. And, for example, a new project for a restoration center in Vilnius was only given a funding because they promised to be open to public, which means that every week there has to be a certain amount of people that they accept, and there has to be an educator that leads people through laboratories. Probably they will not get in, but they're going to be seeing what's going on, and there's going to be a little fee applied, like a few euros as far as I understand. So such things that I remember now.
They have a mic. Oh yeah, you got the microphone off already.
Okay.
Good.
Yes, so I'm Kimberly Frost. I'm a recent graduate of the NYU IFA conservation program, now working in Gwendolyn's studio. And I think part of the struggle of recognizing the status and work of conservators has to do with the history of the work and that it is a women-dominated field. But I think we're also forgetting that for quite a long time, the work of conservators has been viewed as a opposite of, conservation treatment and restoration was viewed as the opposite of authenticity. And so what I feel like we're struggling for is
a way that we're acknowledging publicly the work of conservators without compromising the museum's high public trust that Julian mentioned and the authenticity of the object. And I was wondering if you could give your opinions on that.
Can you say a little bit more what you mean with the opposite of authenticity?
Just that kind of historically and even now with cleaning controversies or the restoration of the painting in Spain with a poor quality, that conservators, restorers were kind of thought of as these later interventions that compromise the authenticity of an object rather than adding to it, and how we're now needing to kind of turn this around and find a way to present and acknowledge the work of conservators publicly without compromising the authenticity of an object in itself.
I don't know if I fully understood, but I think the examples you mentioned, the one in Spain, was of course not done by a conservator. That's the one very important difference, I would say. But also the controversy, the cleaning controversies that took place in the 19th century and in the 20th century were very much about public perception, right? The public was used to seeing Titian and Rubens with this golden glow of the old master, and when the varnish was removed and all these bright colors were visible, it was quite a shock, especially in Victorian times, where that romantic element was very important. So I think I would contest the idea that conservators are seen as opposite, what they do opposite to authenticity, because also in the codes of ethics, what you're from IIC, you're looking for the original intention of the artist, right? That is sort of what you try to understand. And of course, we all know that a lot of that is no longer present in some cases, also because the materials change inherently. So we are all very aware as conservators, but also as researchers, technical art historians, that is a very difficult thing. And I think authenticity is one of these concepts now that is discussed in many ways. So we organized in Glasgow 3 conferences on authenticity, where we immediately made it plural, authenticities, because there are very many layers to discuss. Authenticity in contemporary art, very fascinating, very different. We had a conference on authenticity and use of replicas in conservation and research. So it's a really fascinating element. But I would say that I don't think I agree with you, as you may have noticed.
I think we know these things internally, but I'm talking about the way that we talk to the general public about that, how we're presented in news articles, or whether our name goes on the label and where it goes. Mm-hmm. Does it go next to the artist, below the artist? How is it termed? Those kind of things. And I think that your projects in the Rijksmuseum does a wonderful job of presenting that the subtleties and the sensitivities of these distinctions. But yeah, overall, if we still have a general public that isn't really understanding our role, how can we get them to grasp onto these differences from the past to now? Yeah.
Well, that is true, but that goes much further than just the authenticity thing. Huh? And I think we need to, as we already discussed, I think we need to give a higher profile to the profession and what is happening and what is done. This behind the scenes should be not behind, but very in the open and very much part of policies of museums and institutions to show what is happening so that people get a better understanding. I agree. The Spain thing is, of course, something that keeps coming back and in many guises. But I don't think there are other things on social media. That's a note to make with social media. We were saying we need to get more out there. We need to have clips and Instagram and so on. But of course, there's also a danger because we all know that there are clips on social media that seriously damage the profession of conservators. And I think we know that. When we see that, we are shocked, but the public doesn't. So there is that element where, and I agree totally with you on that one, that we need to make very clear when these things happen. And I know Amber knows that exactly what I'm meaning, but there's and many of you probably, but it's really important that those kind of things are then critiqued, because that damages the profession more, I think, than these old controversies, etc., or the Spain thing, because I think people can understand that that is a different context, right? But so, yeah.
Very much covers the issue of communication skills next to the business skills and the documentation skills and the practical skills, and how do we deliver that to the public? And we often don't have the experience or the tools. And a reason when we have someone from the press coming in, then we are like a rabbit in front, and but we should have a clear, or should be able to clearly express what we are doing so that they can pick it up and spread it further. But that's a challenge. I experienced that many times in different contexts. Also, for example, the tool of exhibitions, when there is the opportunity to implement something in an exhibition because you did the conservation work and you had a wonderful result. How do you work that up that it is really well transferred to the public? That's a bigger challenge than often we assume.
We've done several larger restorations in front, conservation restoration in front of the public, and for that was Dali at Boijmans with a huge triptych, and then a group of 17th century Dutch paintings at the Haagse Historisch Museum, and that's the Hague Historical Museum. Each time, I have to say, I was so pleasantly surprised by the level of the questions and the interest of the public. We did have very specific times when they could ask us questions, because that it's very disturbing if you can actually hear people breathing and things like that behind you. It's always a little bit weird. And then we had this as well at Museum Voorlinden, which is a new museum in Wassenaar in the Netherlands, where people could watch us, but then they couldn't talk to us, which was helpful. And yet I have to say that knowing people are watching you while you're working very intently on something and all of a sudden becoming aware of them, that is not great. Yeah, I mean, I understand that it's good for raising awareness and that people see what we're doing. But yeah, it's a bit of a fine line between being able to do your best work and having people looking at you. Anyway, that's just an aside. Is anybody?
Any reaction to that? Any comment? No. New question?
Okay. Hello, I'm Ana. I'm from Spain, but now I'm studying at Gothenburg University. Okay, my question follows like this topic. So, I know in Spain we don't have an organization system that backs us up, for example, with the XEOMO, or if a contemporary artist sells a sculpture and it breaks, and then that same artist goes and fixes it. I know there are some organizations that are trying to talk with political and governments to have a type of organization system, such as lawyers has or doctor has. Is IIC or ICOM-CC doing something to help, like the different countries to talk with governments and make them think we really need this? I mean, a doctor who is someone that isn't a doctor, he is not going to make surgery on someone because he or she knows that they are going to have problems if they do. So why don't we? And are you, or I mean, ICC or ICOM-CC or any other organization is trying to help us with that? That's my question.
I think if I understand the question, it's about direct, in a sense, policing stroke accreditation. Is that the point of who is acting as a conservator? The short answer is that IIC and ICOM-CC are both international organizations and have to be quite careful, and they are very different, to be clear. ICOM-CC is a government body. It's funded out of UNESCO and based in Paris. IIC is an independent organization, but in a sense that's a local problem for Spain or for the UK or for Germany to police in terms of how it looks after that. It's a VDR issue or it's an ICON issue in terms of how you do that. So I would push it back onto the Spanish Conservators Association really to set up a system, if you can, whereby you can with confidence as a member of the public go to a conservator and know that that person has been vetted and approved by the professional organization is the way to approach it.
Oh, hello. Sorry, I already have a microphone. My name is Hillary. I'm Canadian. I'm just finishing up my course in Malta, doing an internship. My question is perfectly kind of linked to that and the other questions that have been going around. And it is about title protection and accreditation, and links to kind of making sure the public knows who we are. Do you think there is a need or any value in having more rigorous or more formal accreditation systems along the lines of lawyers or engineers? I believe the Canadian one is really mostly just about experience. You have a certain amount of experience, you join the CAPC, and then they are a regulating body, but you don't need to do anything special to join. Do you think there might be value in having a more rigorous system, a testing system, or do you think that might be too limiting for our field or maybe even too costly because people might have to take exams? And do you think that might be a way to go?
As I said, it's not something that IIC buys into for the reasons I've cited, but we watch it very closely. I would throw that back to the audience in terms of somebody who's within ICON, because I think our view is the UK is the organisation that's got that best sorted. In fact, Jane Henderson, Secretary General, is going to wear an ICON hat to respond to that. Thanks, Jane.
So I was involved in ICON's development of the professional standards and the accreditation scheme. And I obviously gave a lot of my unpaid hours to doing that because I thought it was valuable. And I thought it was valuable for a number of reasons in profile and also in being able to charge a decent amount of money. But I think you can't underestimate the scale of work that's involved in that scheme and all the build-up that it's taken, because you have to agree what a conservator is. And you've got to sit down and write an agreement that covers everyone who thinks they're a conservative and you think is a conservative, and leaves out all the people who aren't conservatives and you don't think are conservatives. And that's a big argument. ICON and UK have gone on a competence base, so they haven't done, you've got to do so many years and then you're in. They've used a competency framework which says you've got to be able to do these tasks and they'll be able to identify them, including specifying conservation treatments and understanding your role in serving society, those sorts of things, in order to bring in a diverse set of conservators, from natural scientists, from industrial to paintings to paper. But also on top of that, then, there's had to be an inspection system whereby people have been appointed, there's visits, there's auditing, and then a professional development system, because just because you could do it then doesn't mean you can still do it. So there's a CPD system which gets readers. All of these things cost money and take time. On top of that, ICON have built a public website for the public where the public can find private sector conservators and identify that they're accredited. You can go on that and you can see exactly how much people charge an hour, so you can see the kind of rates that people are charging as a consequence of that. And it also means that people are able to say, we will only give this job to an accredited conservator, which will help pull out some of those people coming in too low on the charges. And I know that it's helped them. And the other thing the accreditation, I think, has really helped is that a lot of my curatorial colleagues say to me how much they value just knowing that they're going to somebody who knows what they're doing, because they know that conservation is important, but they also know that they can't really tell who's a good conservator. If some of our students are struggling to work out who's a good conservator, then it's not unreasonable that our curatorial colleagues struggle with that. So they've said to me that what they really value from the Conservation Register is the assurance that they're going to someone that other conservators have taken the time to validate. But that scheme I think is unique. I mean, this is why I think there's quite a lot of discussions on the American discussion boards about people running through the ICON scheme and what that means. I know that there's quite a few countries, Singapore and I think Hong Kong possibly, have had people do conservation accreditation through ICON. So not everybody likes it because you can get conservation accreditation without a 5-year degree. And because of that, it puts us outside of ENCORE. So there were big issues for us as conservators to discuss and decide upon which routes that we like and which is the best way to go. And all I can say is that I'm convinced that we've done the right thing, and I'm convinced that we've done something to protect our salaries. I just wanted to add another little comment as I grab the mic, and that's about our value. A lot of the questions have been about your career, and I know this is going to sound really cliched, but the thing that really helps me make better decisions is always thinking, I'm valuable, my training is valuable, is what I'm doing respectful of my value? So yes, you can give away your time. Of course you do. If your mum wants something fixed, you're going to do it for nothing. Yes, you can charge a great deal of money. But if someone asks you to do something in conservation that you think is wrong, then you just go back. No, this is not my value. I'm going to walk away. I'm not going to stay here. Because I think that, you know, it has got me to ask for more money, but also for more opportunities. And it has had me ask people to help me. I've just asked people to help me. Because I do remember when I had no money to get to conferences, and I asked people if I could stay in their hotel room, and they said yes. And I asked people to put me in their cars, and they said yes. Also, I asked if I could get into the conference for free if I did this, that, or the other. Basically, ask, because you are valuable, and your training is incredibly valuable. So never sell yourself short. And if you don't do that, I think you will find a pathway.
Any comment on the accreditation issue?
Well, it's hard. This is all I can say. It is very hard in Germany to do it. Like you already said, yeah, where you need a lot of people to help you with this model, to find a system to have a good a good model to accredit a good conservator. Who is a good conservator, who is a bad conservator, and who decides who is this. So we are working on this model, but it is a very long way, I can say. Yeah, this is all I would like to comment on this.
Okay, so there's a question from social media.
We have 2 questions from social media, one from Instagram. Would you recommend emerging conservators to find inspiration for future career path? Thomas mentioned he knew from the beginning he wanted to be a private conservator, but what about people who do not know yet?
Yeah, how I said, then do different internships in different facilities and find out for yourself. And even working for a bad conservator is something you can learn there. Yeah, some of my first bosses was really bad, so I'm never gonna work there again. Yeah, just find out for yourself and work besides the studies. And how it was said, I never always worked in the conservation field to get my money. So I do typical student jobs and making conservation jobs besides. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to bring back to this topic of value and the value of the training also, because I'm now closely involved with that, and also because in my previous experience, we at the Swiss Institute for Art Research, we had a very valuable position with the assistant conservator that we would offer. So
18 months training or 18 months position for a new conservative fresh out of training. And I don't know who would gain more. I think our institution would gain a lot of experience because we would get the most up-to-date techniques and materials, and then the knowledge from the freshly trained conservator, and the conservator would learn the business skills, how to plan conservation, how much time is actually needed to do a treatment. So that was a very good exchange, and that was my experience in that field, but also I would like to know from the panel, how do you actually view the interns that come to your atelier in case of do you also see their contribution as very valuable, and what's that exchange? It does help you keep you up to date with the conservation training and with the new.
Absolutely. I very much value what the interns bring, new energy, new focus, sustainability. Mariana, where are you? You know, these are really issues that I have to say I am aware of, because of course I read the literature and keep up on things, but it hasn't been something I've focused on in the studio at all. And so I said to her, let's just do this. Let's make it a focus of our studio. We're a private studio, but we can show that private studios also can run in a sustainable way and make small changes that will make a big difference in the end. So this is fantastic, and I love the energy that comes in. But you know, it does take my energy too, because I have to then train them and in the things what I think I can do for them, you know, and also to make them better restorers, because that's good for everybody. Yeah, and so this.
I think the thing I'd add to that is there's a familiar refrain which Jonathan Ashley Smith has been promoting, which is that the manual skill levels of people coming out of courses tends to be lower than it has been in the past. I've come to a view that in fact we are getting broader educated conservators coming through, and that is more useful, and that the dexterity, the manual side of things will come, and that's part of our job, is to, as providing internships, is to bring them on that journey and not expect them to work anywhere near as fast as a competent conservator. It has financial implications, but you just have to take that on board, because there's a bigger gain without a doubt from our point of view.
There's one more question from social media.
Yes, hi. So there is another question from Julia, which we heard before, but she wanted to be a bit more concrete about it. So she's wondering, she's a private conservator, I guess, and she feels a little bit left out next to public art conservators who work in a public institute, and also conservation institutes who are also doing work for institutes and stuff like that. And she feels that they kind of take away the payment or the jobs that she would rather want to get as a freelancer. And she tries to do some work with the Spanish Conservation Society to raise more awareness about that problem, and she's wondering whether you or the general public here has some more information about how to handle that problem in Germany or the UK, or how you address that problem, maybe.
Let me weigh in on that one. I get it. I get where she's coming from, that as conservators, we do put a big store by the institutions we've worked at. And if you spend your life as a private conservator, you don't have that, in a sense, that CV around where you've been, who you've been working under in terms of major laboratory leaders. My take on that is it is where the VDR, it's where professional organizations provide that context and network that may not come so easily from the private side of things. So you've got to work harder at it, because that institutional appointment does define us more than it should, is my view, as conservators, because IIC's worked out that 27% of our members actually work privately, and it's a different space out there, certainly. So I think we've probably got to do more at the professional level to work on that, but it's a harder route to go in terms of that recognition.
So I think where Julia is coming from with this idea, because I worked at a museum that there were just 2 conservators, and because the museum was an institution very well known, people would approach the museum for doing conservation treatments of their own works of art. So the problem we had was we had the work at the museum, but we were also getting pieces of art from outside of the museum. So I think it is also on the conservators to put to set a limit on how much we do, because sometimes it is difficult for curators or other people in the museum to know how much it takes for us to actually do these conservation treatments and reports. So I see it that way.
Acknowledged. I think the bigger issue is that I think what Julie's saying is that institutions are taking on board work which is depriving the private conservators of that work. Is that what? Hang on. Sorry, just so we can pick it up online. You need to speak to the mic.
Yes, but the problem from inside of a museum as a conservator is also you get a workload that is bigger than you can actually manage. So for me, it would be working from 9 to 9 or even 10, and really hard days because I had all this work. While if the museum would have let me refer this work to someone else, would have been better for both the conservator at the museum, because I can focus on the museum collection, and for other conservators doing private practice.
In the Netherlands, my experience has been that a lot of the restorers, conservators, are working privately as well as in the museums. And so a lot of times when people call for paintings, they end up going to somebody who's on the staff. This is not allowed in the United States, but it is in the Netherlands still. I know the Rijksmuseum now has stopped, huh? Yeah. Right. Yeah, they stopped completely, right?
You're not allowed to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, so because it is a kind of it is an issue for the people who are trying to establish themselves as private studios or conservator, that it's a kind of unfair competition. I think it's a very valid concern, and that's up to also the institutions to address it and. Yeah, and see if anything can be done about it, like in the Rijksmuseum. Yeah.
Here's another question.
Hi, my name is Melissa Köhler. I graduated last year here at CICS and do work now as a conservator at the Documenta Archive in Kassel. And I want to thank you very much for your interesting and the insights you gave us on your interesting and impressive career path. And I think I want to maybe pick up on that and something that I think your name was Chris also mentioned earlier, impressive CV or motivation and commitment. So following the discussion so far, I find it intriguing that we either talk about superstars or celebrities or being head of an institution, or all of you chose an amazing path, or bankruptcy, unemployed, internships, struggling. Do you think there is a space in between those two extremes? And do you think that a 200% commitment is mandatory to become a successful conservator, like a professional successful conservator? And what does being a successful conservator mean to you? Because yeah, I sometimes find it hard that if we go to a conference, then we hear about an impressive way or an impressive position, but can I just be a conservator and work as a conservator? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the backbone of our profession as well. I mean, you need people who want to just work on paintings, and yeah, so you don't have to be a superstar, and you don't. Yeah, I'm sorry. What? The ones who want to be a superstar.
No. The ones you just said that we need the ones who just want to but the ones who just want to, then they stumble, or they have problems with funding, or.
Well, I mean, there is work. There is work available, and there's times in my life, for example, with 2 little kids, and I was not working like I work now. I mean, I work much more hours now than I did then, and that was a part of the reason that I left working for museums, was because I wanted to have my own time. I knew that when the kids were little, that I wanted to be there in the morning, and I wanted to be there when they got home from school. And I could do the other things, but things change. You could be wanting to just be working on paintings, and then find 10 years later that actually you want to do some research, and because of your experience, you can go and take this path. So it's. Yeah, I think you can go in all directions, actually.
I think it's a really valid question, and thank you for asking it. And it puts what I was talking about a little. I was thinking about is this a bit scary, in a sense. Look, I think I have to be true to myself. I get such a buzz from this profession, and in a sense, being immersed in it. And from my point of view, it's not work. It's, I mean, I live my life where it's just what I do, and it all merges into one. Now, that said, I've got 40 staff, and work-life balance is a really important thing, of something that I push. And I have conservators who are very clearly working, 37 hours a week, and going home and switching right off. We have a very strong policy, no emails over the weekend or in the evenings. It's not, from that point of view, it doesn't stop them sending them on occasions, but please don't think that you have to work at our sort of levels to get satisfaction out of this, because there's a lot of very satisfied conservators who don't have high profiles and who just love the work we're in. I think we've got to be true to ourselves. This is what we do, and it's how we operate, but don't feel it's the only way to proceed.
So, and I think the superstar image is maybe a bit strong, but I do think you probably think more about trailblazer, people who really, sometimes get a high profile, and therefore a lot of attention is also going to the profession, right? And I wouldn't know any conservation superstars, but I do know some people who have done a lot for the profession. And I think that those will always be necessary, not only for conservation, but for many professions as well. And I think that you have those 2 extremes of the bankruptcy, well, that sounds quite extreme, but people who struggle to find a job or get properly paid, and the people who have this high profile, there's also probably quite a lot of experience in between. It's very difficult to pin that down in those 2 extremes. And I think 90% of all of us do a good job, and that's you know, in every profession the case. So just do a good job and be true to yourself, like you say, to your values, and then that is what you need to do, right?
Maybe just one more little comment on that. So comparing our profession to others, like for example, art history, I would say a large percentage of the graduates of our profession are still in the profession after 20 years in comparison to other professions, like art historians, for example. So there is a good opportunity, and we did an inquiry some years ago about our graduates, and that reflected this, so that there are many opportunities. I think there is a challenge how to specialize and which direction, which path to take. Is it just by the opportunity you get, by chance, by the circumstances, or can you model that? When do you start to specialize and to say, that's my area I want to get in because I see a job opportunity there, and there's my perspective? And I think that's more and more an issue for all of you, or all of us. Where do we find our path, and how do we find this path in this enormous, complex profession? I mean, take the field of conservation of contemporary art, media art conservation, installation art, contemporary painting. Where are the boundaries? We're going into an archive of a contemporary art exhibitions, like the Documenta, requires different challenges then. So how do we find these new possibilities, and when do we start to explore them and to enter them? I think that's something what I really fascinated also by that, and where I would think that there are many questions on this issue, but I'm afraid that we come slowly to the end of this very first session, but there will be more time tomorrow to continue on this issue, and there are more panelists, and so think about it, about your questions and statements that you would like to give maybe then tomorrow in the next session. I would like to take the chance here to thank all our panelists for coming to Cologne, a long way, half of the globe, or even more, and from the Netherlands, from Potsdam, to join us here and to feel strong enough to sit here and to respond to your questions. So thank you for being so open-minded, and thank you for all your stimulating questions that you raised. I think that was a good start this afternoon. I look forward to tomorrow, and I wish you a very pleasant evening and fun in Cologne. And I may guess that